Wesley Cole grabbed Evelyn's wrist at the altar, shoved a fistful of legal papers against her chest, and said loud enough for the first 3 pews to hear, "Sign it or there's no wedding." She looked down at the papers. She looked up at the man she had said yes to. And right there in front of God and every soul in Silver Creek, she understood that she had never been a bride to him. She had always been a transaction. She pushed the papers back into his chest and said, "Then there's no wedding." That was when Wesley Cole turned to face the crowd and started to destroy her. If that just stopped your heart, stay with me, because this story is only getting started. Subscribe to our channel right now and follow Evelyn's story all the way to the end, because I promise you what happens next will stay with you. And drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Evelyn Whitmore had sewn her own wedding dress. That was the detail that would stay with her longest in the weeks and months after. Not the humiliation, not the silence of the crowd, not even Wesley Cole's voice rolling through that church like something rehearsed. It was the dress. Every stitch placed by her own hands late at night by lamplight needle pulling ivory thread through good cotton, while she let herself believe for once in her careful, guarded life that she had earned something beautiful. She had started it in April. Finished the hem the night before the wedding. Pressed it that morning with a hot iron and hung it on the back of her bedroom door and stood looking at it for a long moment before she put it on. She was 31 years old. She had buried her mother at 15, her father at 24, and she had held her father's 32 acres through 2 bad winters, a drought year, and 6 years of doing every kind of work a woman alone could find in a Montana Territory town. She had built her sewing business from nothing. 1 customer, then 3, then 12. Then enough that she could stop lying awake, calculating whether she'd make rent. She had done all of it without anyone carrying her. She had done all of it, and now she was getting married, and she had made the dress herself because that was who she was. A woman who made things with her own hands and made them right. Her neighbor, Ruth Hadley, was already in the kitchen when she came downstairs, fussing with a ribbon and talking at the speed she always reached when she was anxious on someone else's behalf. "You eat yet?" "Good morning to you too, Ruth." "I'm serious, Evelyn. You cannot walk down that aisle on nothing. The whole town's going to be watching, and I will not have you faint in front of Wesley Cole's mother and give that woman anything else to say about you." "I'm not going to faint." That is precisely what women say before they faint. Ruth pushed a biscuit into her hand. "Eat." Evelyn ate. She sat at her kitchen table in the dress she'd made herself, and she chewed and she breathed, and she let the morning be what it was. Quiet, unremarkable. The kind of morning that didn't announce itself before it became the most important one of your life. "You nervous?" Ruth asked. "I'm something. Nervous isn't quite the word." "Good something or bad something?" Evelyn thought about it honestly. "I keep waiting for it to feel real," she said. "It doesn't feel real yet." Ruth sat down across from her and reached for her hand. "It's real, sweetheart, and you deserve every bit of it." She believed that. She believed it walking to the church. She believed it standing at the doors listening to the music. Feeling the particular weight of knowing every person she'd ever known was sitting in those pews, waiting to watch her walk. She believed it when the doors opened and she stepped into the aisle and saw the rows of faces turning toward her. Saw the morning light coming through the windows, the way it always did in August, clean and hard and gold. She stopped believing it the moment she reached the altar, and Wesley Cole leaned close to her ear. "Before we do this," he said quietly, "I need you to sign something." She turned to look at him. His face was exactly the same. Composed. Handsome. The face she had been looking at for 18 months and reading as love. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and pressed a folded set of papers into her hands, smooth and practiced, like a man who had planned the gesture. She unfolded them. "Read the first paragraph." Read it again. The air in the church went out of her lungs. It was a property transfer. Her land, her father's land, the 32 acres on the north edge of Silver Creek that she had scrimped and fought and refused to surrender for 6 years, transferring full legal control to Wesley Cole upon the execution of the marriage certificate. Today's date already filled in at the top. A notary stamp from Billings already waiting at the bottom. The only thing missing was her signature. Wesley. She kept her voice below the music. What is this? It's standard, he said. When two people's holdings combine under one household, sign it and we'll proceed. This isn't combining anything. This is you taking my land. Evelyn. Something shifted under his face, just a fraction, just enough. Don't make a scene. I'm not making a scene. She pushed the papers back against his chest. I'm declining to sign. There is a difference. This is not optional. She looked at him. Really looked at him the way she understood now. She hadn't looked at him in months. She had been looking at the version of him she'd been told she was seeing. This was the first time she was looking at the version that was actually there. Then neither is this wedding, she said, because I will not sign my father's land over to anyone. Not for you. Not for any reason you could name. Wesley Cole was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then he took the papers back from her, smoothed them against his jacket, and turned to face the church. I owe this town an apology, he said. His voice was calm. It carried perfectly. The music stuttered and stopped. Every head in every pew turned. I have tried to be a decent man, Wesley said. I have tried to do right. And I have failed in that because I allowed myself to be taken in by a woman I believed was honest with me. Evelyn's hands went cold. It has come to my attention, he continued, that Miss Whitmore has been carrying significant debts throughout our courtship. Debts she deliberately concealed. Debts she intended to resolve through this marriage. He paused. Let it sit. I cannot in good conscience bind myself to a woman who has deceived me in this way. I cannot stand before God and this community and pretend otherwise. I'm sorry for the disruption. Truly. The silence that followed was the worst sound Evelyn Whitmore had ever heard. Not one word of that is true, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Not one word. He came to me at this altar with papers to sign over my land, and when I refused. I have documentation. Wesley said, simply, still speaking to the crowd, still not looking at her. She always did keep to herself an awful lot, said a voice from the third pew. Martha Aldrich, who had never liked Evelyn and had always considered her independence to be a character flaw rather than a survival strategy. I always thought it was odd, a woman her age, no family, building a business alone like that. Makes you wonder what she was hiding. Now hold on. That was Jim Pearson from the general store, halfway out of his pew. Let's not be hasty. Evelyn's a good woman. I've known her since she was a girl. She's standing right there and she hasn't denied the debts, said another voice. Harold Briggs, who owed Wesley Cole money on a grain contract and was not about to contradict the man who held the paper. If she's innocent, why isn't she speaking? I am speaking, Evelyn said louder. I am standing right here, and I am telling you that I have no hidden debts, that I have never deceived this man, and that what you just witnessed was Wesley Cole trying to steal my land at the altar, when I wouldn't sign it over quietly. That's enough. Wesley's voice cut over hers, quiet but absolute. I think we've all heard enough. And then he walked away, down the aisle, right through the middle of those pews. People moved aside for him, and some of them murmured things she couldn't hear, and one woman reached out and touched his arm as he passed in what looked very much like sympathy. He walked out of the Silver Creek Baptist Church, and the doors swung shut behind him, and the sound of it went through Evelyn like something breaking. The pastor closed his Bible. That was all. That small, quiet sound. Evelyn stood at the altar in her handmade dress, in the absolute silence of 60 people who had known her all her life and were not in this moment moving to help her. She heard a child ask something in a whisper, and a mother shush it. She heard the bench creak as Harold Briggs sat back down. She heard her own breathing. Then Ruth Hadley was beside her, materializing out of the pews with her hat crooked and her face white with fury, and her hand locked hard around Evelyn's arm. Look straight ahead, Ruth said low and fierce directly in her ear. You put your chin up and you look straight ahead and you walk out of this church like you own it, which you do, because your family built half the original pews, and I will not let you give these people a single thing more to talk about. Do you hear me? I hear you, Evelyn said. Good. Walk. They walked. Evelyn kept her eyes forward and her chin level, and she did not look at a single face, not because she was ashamed, but because she did not trust what she might say if she looked at them. She had spent 6 years building something in this town, not just the business, but a place in it, a reputation, a small but solid sense of belonging, and she had just watched a man with a smooth voice and a pocket full of papers dismantle it in 45 seconds. The doors opened. Montana sunlight hit her face. She stopped on the top step because she couldn't quite make her feet continue not yet. Ruth was saying something, but it wasn't landing. She heard footsteps on the wooden steps behind her. She turned, bracing for more. For another face wearing that particular expression, the mixture of fascination and manufactured concern that people showed when they had witnessed a disaster and wanted credit for caring. She turned, expecting that. She found Caleb Mercer instead. How was not someone Silver Creek talked about much, which was unusual. He owned land north of town, a considerable spread, well-managed good cattle operation, from what she understood. Somewhere in his early 40s, tall, lean, in the way of men who worked outdoors in all seasons, with dark eyes that were fixed on her right now with an expression she couldn't categorize because it contained none of the things she'd been bracing for. No pity, no fascination, no performance of sympathy. Howe was holding his hat in both hands, turning it once slowly. "Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, like a man who had decided exactly what he was going to say before he opened his mouth. "I don't have words that'll fix what just happened in there. I'm not going to pretend I do." "Then what are you doing out here?" she asked. "I reckon I just didn't want you standing on these steps alone." She looked at him for a long moment. He didn't look away. He didn't add anything, didn't pad the silence with explanation or elaboration. He just stood there with his hat in his hands and let the words be what they were. Before she could find an answer, he reached forward and draped his coat across her shoulders. She hadn't realized she was cold. The wind had come down from the north the way it did in August mornings when summer was already starting to consider its exit, and she had left her wrap on a church pew, and the coat smelled like wood smoke and saddle leather, and something solid underneath both of those things. She pulled it tighter before she could think better of it. "You should go back inside," she said. "People will wonder where you went." "I find I don't much care what people wonder this morning," he said. He stepped down beside her so he wasn't behind her anymore. She noticed the deliberateness of it. Standing with her, not watching her. "I knew your father," he said. "Thomas Whitmore was a man who kept his word and worked his land honest. I came today out of respect for that. I'm sorry it turned into what it did." "He came with papers," she said. "At the altar. He wanted me to sign my land over right there before the vows." "I know." "You can't know. You couldn't." "I've seen Wesley Cole work before," he said. "Different town, different woman, same approach." He paused. She signed. The quiet weight of those two words settled over her like something heavy. She looked at him. What happened to her? She lost her land inside of a year. He sold it and moved on. He turned his hat once more. "You didn't sign." "No," she said. "I didn't." "No," he said. "You didn't." It was Ruth who broke the moment, appearing at the church doors, with her hat fully askew now, and her voice at the pitch she reserved for genuine emergency. "Evelyn. Evelyn, we need to go right now before Martha Aldridge comes out here and says something I have to apologize for later." Evelyn started to slip the coat from her shoulders. "Keep it," Caleb said. "Return it when you're ready." She kept it. She walked to the wagon with Ruth's hand on her arm, and the coat stayed around her shoulders, and she didn't look back. The first cancellation came Monday morning. A note slipped under the shop door, no signature, just given recent circumstances, I'll be making other arrangements. Thank you for your prior service. The second came Monday afternoon. That one was verbal. A woman named Agnes Cole, no relation to Wesley, but enough of his social circle to have decided which way the wind was blowing. Agnes stood in the doorway of the workroom and could not quite look Evelyn in the eye when she said she'd be taking her business to the seamstress in Mill Haven going forward. "That's a 12-mile ride," Evelyn said pleasantly. "I hope the work is worth it." Agnes left. By Wednesday, she had lost 7 regular customers. By Thursday, she stood in her workroom, looking at an order book that had gone from full to half empty in 4 days, and understood exactly what Wesley Cole had bought with his 45 seconds at the altar. He hadn't just humiliated her. He had gone for the thing that would actually break her. The livelihood, the independence, the daily practical proof that she didn't need anyone to survive. That. Thursday evening, Ruth came with food, the same way she always came with food. Unannounced, direct with a pot of stew, and a look that said she already knew things were bad and had already decided she wasn't leaving until something had been eaten. "How many?" Ruth asked, setting the pot on the stove. "7 so far, maybe 10 by end of week." "Those cowards." "They're not cowards," Evelyn said, sitting at the table. "They're practical. Wesley Cole is a man with money and connections and a story people want to believe, and I'm a woman alone on 32 acres outside of town. The math isn't complicated. The math is wrong is what it is. Wrong and right don't keep the lights on, Ruth." Ruth slammed a bowl down harder than necessary and poured stew into it and pushed it toward Evelyn. "What are you going to do?" Evelyn picked up the spoon. She looked at her hands, calloused, ink-stained, marked by years of the particular physical labor of fine sewing that looked gentle from the outside and was anything but. She thought about her father, sitting at this same table in the year before he died, working through numbers that refused to add up, refusing to quit. She thought about the dress hanging in her bedroom that she had not yet taken off the hook because she didn't know what to do with it. She thought about Wesley Cole walking down that aisle while people moved aside for him. "I'm going to keep my customers," she said. "The ones that are left. I'm going to keep my land. And I'm going to keep working until Wesley Cole's story runs out of room to breathe because lies only survive when nobody's left standing to contradict them. And I'm still standing." Ruth looked at her for a long moment. Then she sat down across from her and said, "All right. Then I'm going to personally tell every woman in this town that Evelyn Whitmore is the finest seamstress in Silver Creek, and anyone taking their business to Millhaven is a fool who'll be back inside of a month with inferior hemming and regret." That might not move the needle. It might not hurt it either. "No," Evelyn said. "It might not." She ate the stew. It was good. Outside the window, Silver Creek was going about its evening the way it always did. Horses on the main street, lanterns coming on in windows. The sounds of ordinary life, continuing without particular regard for her situation. That indifference was its own kind of thing. She wasn't sure if it was comforting or devastating. Perhaps both at once. It was the next morning, Friday, less than a week after the wedding, when she had the worst moment of those first days, worse than the cancellations, worse than the gossip. She was walking back from the post office when she saw Clara Devlin on the other side of the street. Clara Devlin, who had been her closest friend before Ruth. Clara Devlin, who had sat beside her at her father's funeral and held her hand through the whole of it. Clara Devlin, who had eaten at her table and lent her books and told her 3 months ago, when Evelyn first started having doubts about Wesley, that she hadn't yet named that he seemed like a good and solid man, and she was lucky to have found him. Clara saw her. Evelyn saw Clara see her. And then Clara Devlin turned slightly to the right, found something very interesting in the window of the millinery shop, and became suddenly completely absorbed in it. Evelyn kept walking. She did not stop. She did not call out. She walked straight and steady the way Ruth had told her to walk out of that church, and she waited until she was around the corner and out of sight, before she stopped and pressed her back against the wall of the feed store and closed her eyes and breathed. That was when she understood the full scope of what had been done to her. Not just the customers. Not just the gossip. The actual human cost of it. The people who had loved her, or near enough to it, deciding that loving her now was inconvenient. She stood there for exactly 30 seconds. She counted them. Then she opened her eyes and went back to work. It was that same Friday afternoon that Caleb Mercer came to her shop. The knock was unhurried. She opened the door expecting nobody in particular and found him standing there with his hat in his hand and a look of quiet purpose on his face that she was beginning to understand was simply how his face operated. "Mr. Mercer." "Miss Whitmore, I hope I'm not interrupting anything urgent." I have 40% fewer customers than I had this time last week, so urgent is perhaps too strong a word. Come in. He came in. He looked around the workroom the way a man looks at a working space. He respects taking in the quality of it without commenting on it. Then he reached into his jacket and produced a folded sheet of paper and set it on the cutting table between them. I've got 16 ranch hands, he said. Most of them have been wearing the same work clothes since spring. I need heavy stitching on 8 pairs of canvas work pants, replacement buttons on a dozen jackets, 2 saddle blankets, re-hemmed, and a pair of riding gloves that my man Holt has destroyed through what I can only describe as aggressive indifference to personal property. She unfolded the paper. It was a list specific, organized with measurements already noted in clean handwriting. This is a considerable order, she said. I know what it is. I'd like it done in 3 weeks. I'll pay half up front, half on completion. If the work is what I expect it to be, I'll want to continue on a regular basis, monthly standing order, consistent work. She looked up. Why are you here? I just explained. You explained the order. I'm asking why you're here. She kept her voice even. This week specifically, at my door. Because if this is charity dressed up as commerce, Mr. Mercer, I'd rather you say so plainly, so I can decline plainly. I was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that wasn't evasion, it was consideration. I have needed a reliable seamstress for the ranch for 2 seasons, he said. My last arrangement fell through. I've been putting it off. What happened Sunday reminded me that there are things I shouldn't keep putting off. He paused. And yes, it also occurred to me that you might have available time through no fault of your own, and that a woman of your skill shouldn't be sitting idle because some man decided his pride was more important than her reputation. She looked at him. He didn't flinch from it. That's not charity, he said. That's commerce with a clear conscience. If the work doesn't meet my standard, I won't continue the arrangement. I expect it will. All right, she said. All right, Mr. Mercer, I'll take the order. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly, but a kind of settling, like something that had been held under tension, releasing slightly. He reached into a different pocket and set the first payment on the cutting table. Exact amount counted out. A man who did not make people chase what they were owed. I'll need a receipt, he said. I keep receipts for everything, she said, reaching for her book. Good, he said. So do I. She did the work the way she did all work, completely precisely, without shortcuts. The canvas pants were the heaviest labor, demanding the kind of reinforced stitching that required strength and patience in equal measure, the sort of seaming that had to withstand not just wear, but the daily violence of ranch work in all weather. She did them at night by lamplight after the regular orders were finished. The gloves she rebuilt from scratch over a weekend. The saddle blankets she finished on Monday. When Caleb came to collect, he went through every piece with the focused attention of a man who understood what good work looked like and was not going to pretend otherwise if it fell short. It did not fall short. He turned the last jacket inside out, checked the seam finishing, set it down. These are the best-made work clothes that have come onto my ranch since I bought the place. Thank you, she said. I'm not saying it to be kind. I'm saying it because it's accurate. He picked up the wrapped bundles. I'll send the next order at the end of the month. I'll be here. He started toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. Miss Whitmore. Yes. The people in this town are going to figure out the truth eventually. He said it the way he said everything, without decoration, without softening. Small places always do. It just usually takes longer than it ought to. I know, she said. I want you to know that I don't believe what he said in that church. I haven't from the moment he said it. She held his gaze. Why not? Because I know what a man looks like when he's telling the truth. He said, and I know what a man looks like when he's reading from a script he's had in his pocket all morning. He put his hat on. You were telling the truth. He was reading his script. He left. The bell above the door rang once and went quiet. Evelyn Whitmore stood at her cutting table for a long moment after he was gone. Then she picked up her scissors, opened the next order, and went back to work. It was on a Saturday afternoon in early September, 3 weeks after the wedding that hadn't happened, that everything she had been beginning to suspect clicked into place, and she understood for the first time the actual shape of what had been done to her. She was at Jim Pearson's general store picking up thread and beeswax when she caught the edge of a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. Two men near the back of the store, Jim and a stranger well-dressed in a way that said, "City money shoes that had never touched a dirt road." The stranger had a leather satchel and the particular confident posture of a man who went places and made things happen there. "Survey team was up in the North Valley last month," the stranger was saying. "Line their planning would cut right through." Jim Pearson looked up, saw Evelyn and said something low. The stranger turned, assessed her with a quick professional glance, said nothing more. She bought her thread. She walked home. She sat at her kitchen table and turned what she'd heard over and over in her mind like a coin she was trying to read. A railway survey. North Valley. Her land was in the North Valley. She got up and went to the box where she kept her important documents, the box she had not opened since the morning of the wedding. She found the papers Wesley had pressed into her hands at the altar and spread them on the table and read them again this time, looking for the things she hadn't known to look for the first time. There at the bottom of the second page, buried in the language of the transfer clause, including all future commercial development rights and easements pertaining to said property. She sat back in her chair. He had known about the railway. He had known before anyone in Silver Creek had heard a whisper of it. He had spent 18 months courting her patiently, carefully saying exactly the right things in exactly the right order, not because he loved her, not because he admired her independence, not because he saw anything in her worth seeing. Because of 32 acres on the north edge of the valley that a railway company had recently decided was exactly where they needed to lay track. The courtship was a business transaction. The wedding was a property acquisition. And when she had refused to hand over what he came for, he had done the next best thing, destroyed her reputation so completely that by the time he came back with another approach, she would be desperate enough to accept terms she never would have accepted otherwise. She sat at her kitchen table in the quiet of a September afternoon and felt the full cold weight of it settle over her. Then she folded the papers neatly, put them back in the box, put the box back on the shelf. Wesley Cole thought he had broken her. He thought the week she'd just survived the cancellations, the gossip, Clara Devlin and her suddenly fascinating millinery window, the closing of doors that had been open to her for years. He thought all of that had done its work on her the way it was designed to do. He was wrong. She was still here. She had her land, her records, her receipts going back 6 years, and a new understanding of exactly what she was dealing with. And she had something else now. Something she hadn't had a week ago, the knowledge that not everyone in Silver Creek had chosen his story over hers. That one man at least had walked out of that church and stood on those steps because he didn't want her to be alone. She pulled her work basket toward her and picked up her needle and threaded it in one clean motion. Wesley Cole wasn't finished. She was certain of that the way she was certain of tight stitching, not because anyone had told her, but because she knew how this kind of work operated. He would come back. He would try again. And when he did, she intended to be ready. She bent her head to the work. The lamp burned late that night in Evelyn Whitmore's workroom, and every stitch she set was deliberate, and every seam she ran was built to hold against whatever came next. The month after the wedding, that didn't happen. Silver Creek became a different town, not in any way you could point to and name exactly. The streets were the same. The buildings were the same. Jim Pearson still opened his general store at 7 in the morning and closed it at 6 in the evening, and the livery still smelled like hay and horses, and the women still gathered on Tuesday afternoons at the Methodist church to do needlework and talk about everyone who wasn't in the room. Everything was exactly as it had always been. Except that Evelyn Whitmore walked through all of it now like a woman walking through water. Everything slightly slower, slightly heavier. Every interaction carrying an undertow that hadn't been there before. She noticed the way conversations stopped when she came within earshot. Not dramatically, not rudely, just a pause, a shift, the particular recalibration of people who had been saying something they didn't want her to hear. She noticed the way certain women on Main Street found things to look at when she passed a window, a list the middle distance. She noticed that the pastor, Reverend Miles, who had known her father and baptized her and eaten at her table twice a year for as long as she could remember, now greeted her on Sundays with a warmth that was exactly 2 degrees cooler than it used to be. Not cold, just cooler. The kind of adjustment a man makes when he's not sure yet which way a situation is going to settle. She filed all of it away and kept walking and kept working. The order book was thin. Thinner than it had been in years, thinner than the worst months after her father died when she was 24, and learning from scratch how to run a sewing business because the alternative was selling the land, and she had promised her father on his deathbed that she would not do that. She had 12 regular customers left down from 23. The ones who stayed were the ones who had known her father well enough to feel a personal loyalty, or the ones who were practical enough to know that Evelyn Whitmore's stitching was simply better than anything else available within riding distance, or the ones like Ruth, who were constitutionally incapable of letting a lie go unchallenged. What kept her going was the work itself, and Caleb Mercer's standing order, and a stubbornness that she had inherited from her father and had never once in her life been sorry for. She was at her cutting table on a Tuesday morning in mid-September, 3 weeks after the wedding, working through a hem repair for one of her remaining customers, when the bell above the shop door rang, and she looked up expecting Ruth. It was not Ruth. Wesley Cole walked into her workroom like he owned it, which she suspected was exactly the point to walk into a space that belonged to her and make it feel like it didn't. He was dressed well as always, hat in hand as always, the polished surface of him undisturbed, as if the last 3 weeks had been nothing more than a minor administrative complication. "Evelyn," he said. She set down her scissors. She did not stand up. "You have 30 seconds to tell me what you want before I ask you to leave." That's not a very welcoming way to start a conversation. You destroyed my reputation in front of 60 people and cost me half my business. Welcome isn't the word I'd reach for in your position either. She folded her hands on the table. 20 seconds. Something moved in his expression. Not guilt, she noted. Something more calculated than that. He reached into his jacket, and she felt her entire body tighten, remembering the last time he'd reached into that jacket. But what he produced this time was not papers. It was an envelope, which he set on the edge of her cutting table. "I want to make things right," he said. "I said things in that church that I said in the heat of the moment. Things I regret." "Open the envelope," she said. "Evelyn. Open it or take it back. I don't accept things from you without knowing what they are." He opened it. Inside was money more than she made in 2 months, she estimated at a glance, and a single folded note. She didn't touch either one. "What is that supposed to do?" she asked. "It's to cover any losses you've experienced since you lied about me in public." "Since our misunderstanding," he said carefully. She looked at him. Then she looked at the envelope. Then she looked back at him and understood with the cold clarity of a woman who had spent 3 weeks thinking about railway surveys and property transfer clauses exactly what this visit was. It was not remorse. It was reconnaissance. He had come to see how she was holding up, whether the pressure of the last 3 weeks had done enough work on her to make her movable. "Get out of my shop," she said. "Evelyn, you're trying to find out whether I'm desperate enough yet." She stood up then, because she wanted to be standing when she said the next part. "I'm not. I've still got my land. I've still got my business, and I've still got every document I've ever generated in 6 years of operating it. You can take your envelope and your regret, and you can get out of my shop and stay out of it, because the next time you come through that door, I will have the sheriff with me." Wesley Cole looked at her for a long moment, and then he smiled just slightly, just at one corner of his mouth. And it was the worst smile she had ever seen on a human face, because it was the smile of a man who was not worried. A man who believed he had time and options, and that she had neither. "You're a remarkable woman, Evelyn," he said. "I always did admire that about you." He picked the envelope back up, put it in his jacket, settled his hat on his head. "Think about the railway," he said very quietly, as if it were an afterthought. "When you're ready to have a real conversation, you know where to find me." He walked out. The bell above the door rang. She stood at her cutting table and listened to the sound of his footsteps moving away down the boardwalk until she couldn't hear them anymore. Then she sat back down, picked up her scissors, and realized her hands were not steady. She put the scissors down and pressed both palms flat on the table and breathed through her nose for 10 full seconds. He knew she had figured out about the railway. He had just confirmed it casually, deliberately, like a man laying a card on the table to let you know how many cards he still had left. He wasn't afraid of her knowing. That was the part that scared her. A man who wasn't afraid of you knowing his plan was a man who believed there was nothing you could do about it. She picked her scissors back up. Her hands were steady again. She was going to prove him wrong about that. She went to see Henry Alcott the next morning. Henry Alcott was Silver Creek's only attorney. A thin, precise man in his 60s who had practiced law in 3 territories and retired to Montana for reasons he never fully explained, and which most people assumed involved a woman somewhere back east. He had handled her father's estate and had known Evelyn since she was a child, and he was one of the 12 remaining customers. His mending was always brought in, promptly paid for, promptly, and collected without any of the social awkwardness that had infected her other interactions since the wedding. She told him everything. The papers at the altar, the property transfer clause, the railway survey, conversation she'd overheard at Pearson's store, Wesley's visit yesterday, and the thing he'd said as he left. She spread the original papers on his desk and watched him read them with the focused stillness of a man for whom reading documents was a physical act, full-bodied and complete. When he finished, he folded his hands on top of them and looked at her over his glasses. "You didn't sign these." "No." "And you kept them." "I keep everything." He was quiet for a moment. "The commercial development clause is aggressive," he said. "If the railway comes through where the survey suggests, and I've heard things, Evelyn. I want you to know that I have heard things. Your land is directly in the path of the most logical route. The value of it could triple. Possibly more." "I know," she said. "Wesley Cole knew that before he ever walked into your shop with that jacket to be repaired." Henry said it flatly, not as an accusation, but as a fact that needed to be named. The courtship, the engagement, the wedding, all of it was designed to position him as your husband before the railway information became public knowledge. "Yes." "The man is not stupid." "No," she said. "He's not. That's the problem." Henry looked at the papers again. "You can't bring a legal action against him for what he said in that church, not with what you have right now. Slander is difficult to prove and expensive to pursue. And frankly, a jury in this territory is going to be unsympathetic to a woman bringing a case against a prominent businessman without substantial documentation." He paused. "But," she waited, "if he makes another move on your property, any move formal or otherwise, we can act. And the railway information changes the landscape considerably. There are people who would be very interested to know that a private individual obtained advance knowledge of a government survey route and used it to manipulate land transactions." He tapped the papers with one finger. "That's not just dishonest, Evelyn. Depending on how he got that information, it could be criminal." She felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, it was too early for relief, but the particular settling of a woman who has been carrying something alone and has just found someone who can help her carry it. "What do I need to do?" "Document everything. Every interaction with Wesley Cole going forward, dates, times, exact words. Keep your land records current and accessible. And tell me immediately if he makes any formal claim against the property." Henry looked at her steadily. "And don't sell Evelyn, no matter what kind of pressure he applies. Don't sell." "I have never once considered selling," she said. "Good." He picked up the papers and handed them back to her. "Then we're going to be all right." Stefan. She was walking back from Henry's office when she ran into Tom Briggs. Tom was Harold Briggs's son, 19 years old, a big, soft-spoken boy who had helped her carry lumber once after her back fence blew down in a windstorm. He was coming out of the feed store with a sack over each shoulder, and he pulled up short when he saw her, and the expression that crossed his face was the particular agony of a young man who had been told to do something he found distasteful and had not yet developed enough guile to hide his discomfort. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Tom," she said pleasantly. He shifted the sacks on his shoulders, looked at a point slightly to the left of her face. My father wanted me to tell you, that is, we won't be needing the mending service anymore, going forward. My mother's going to handle it herself." "Your mother has arthritis in both hands," Evelyn said. Tom Briggs went red to the roots of his hair. "Yes, ma'am," he said miserably. She looked at him. This boy who had nothing to do with any of it, and who was carrying his father's message like a stone he didn't want to be holding. "Tom," she said more gently, "tell me something. Not for your father, for yourself. Do you believe what Wesley Cole said about me in that church?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "No, ma'am, I never did." "All right," she said. "Thank you for telling me." She walked on. Behind her, she heard him shift the sacks on his shoulders and keep walking too, and she thought about what it meant that even people who believed her were doing what their fathers told them anyway. And then she thought about something Henry Alcott had said. There are people who would be very interested, and she filed that away with all the other things she was filing away, building a case. One small piece at a time, the way she built everything, stitch by careful stitch. Jete. It was Ruth who brought her the news about Dorothy Haynes. Dorothy Haynes was 62, a widow, and had been a fixture of Silver Creek's social life for 30 years, in the way that certain women became fixtures, not through wealth or beauty or remarkable talent, but through the sheer consistent force of their own opinions, delivered at volume on every available occasion. Dorothy had been at the wedding. Dorothy had been, Evelyn estimated, in the third or fourth pew, close enough to have heard everything clearly. Dorothy had not spoken up during the spectacle, and Evelyn had not expected her to, because Dorothy Haynes, for all her voluminous opinions, was not a woman who committed herself to a position until she was certain it was the winning one. Ruth arrived on Thursday afternoon, with the particular expression she wore when she had information she couldn't wait to deliver, and was only barely managing to wait until she was inside with the door closed. Dorothy Haynes is telling people she saw Wesley Cole talking to a man from the railway company 2 months before the wedding. Ruth said, settling into the kitchen chair with the air of a woman who had been carrying something heavy and was deeply relieved to set it down. Apparently she was at the hotel in Billings visiting her sister, and she saw them at dinner together, and she didn't think anything of it at the time, but now? Now she's thinking about it, Evelyn said. Now she's thinking about it very loudly to everyone who will listen, and Dorothy Haynes talking loud is approximately the same as a public announcement. Ruth leaned forward. "Evelyn, this is something." "It's a start," Evelyn said carefully. "It's not enough yet. It's more than you had yesterday." "Yes." She turned her teacup in her hands. "Who has she told?" "Margaret Pierce, Louise Webb. Half the Tuesday needlework group, I imagine, because Dorothy never met information she could hold privately for more than 48 hours. Ruth paused. "Wesley Cole is going to hear about it." "I know. Which means he's going to do something." "I know that too," Evelyn said. "I'm counting on it." Ruth stared at her. "You want him to make another move." "I want him to show his hand," Evelyn said. "Right now, all I have is his papers and my suspicions and an overheard conversation. Every time he does something, he leaves evidence. And Wesley Cole is not the kind of man who's been told no enough times to know how to be patient about it. Dorothy Haynes talking to the Tuesday needlework group is going to make him impatient." She looked at Ruth steadily. "An impatient man makes mistakes." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then, "When did you become like this?" "Like what?" "Like this. Calculating. Strategic." Evelyn thought about it. "About 30 seconds after he walked away from that altar," she said. The following Monday. Caleb Mercer's ranch hand. Holt. Thomas came to pick up the new monthly order, and he didn't come alone. Holt was 26, broad-shouldered, with the permanently cheerful demeanor of a man who found most things in life straightforwardly enjoyable and didn't overthink them. He came in with a boy of about 16, trailing behind him. The boy had Caleb's coloring and Caleb's particular quality of watchful stillness, and Evelyn understood immediately who he was before Holt introduced him. "This here is Daniel," Holt said. "Mr. Mercer's nephew. He's visiting from Bozeman for the month. Mr. Mercer thought it might be useful for him to see how the ranch accounts work start to finish, ordering supplies, paying bills, that kind of thing." "Hello, Daniel," Evelyn said. "Ma'am," the boy said. Quiet, careful. She liked him immediately. She went through the order with Holt, checked the items against the list, wrote the receipt. Daniel watched the whole process with the concentrated attention of someone taking notes in their head. When Holt stepped out to load the wagon, Daniel lingered at the edge of the workroom. "Mr. Mercer talks about your work," he said. "Does he? He says you do the best heavy stitching he's found in the territory. He says a seam that holds under ranch work is an honest seam." She looked at the boy. "That sounds like your uncle." He also said. Daniel stopped, reconsidered. He had, she thought, been raised by someone who taught him to think before he spoke. "He said that Silver Creek doesn't deserve you," he said. That's what he said. Exactly. She felt that land somewhere in her chest and had to turn back to her receipt book to give herself a moment. "You can tell your uncle," she said, "that Silver Creek and I are working out our differences." Daniel almost smiled. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I'll tell him that." It was 3 days later that the first formal letter arrived. She found it slipped under the shop door on a Thursday morning, official-looking envelope. Billing's return address she didn't recognize. She opened it at her cutting table with a letter knife, unfolded it, and read it twice before she fully processed what it said. It was a notice of debt claim, filed against her property. The claimant was a company called Territorial Commerce Associates. The debt alleged was $430, supposedly representing an unpaid loan taken out in her name 18 months ago, conveniently around the time she and Wesley had first started courting. She had never taken out any loan. She had never heard of Territorial Commerce Associates. She had never signed any document relating to any debt of any kind. Her hands were completely steady when she folded the letter back up. She noted the date, the claim name, the alleged amount, and the name of the Billings attorney listed as the representative. She added it to the box with the wedding papers and her land deed and her 6 years of business records. Then she put on her coat and walked directly to Henry Alcott's office. Henry read the letter with the same focused stillness as before. When he finished, he set it down and looked at Evelyn with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before, something between admiration and anger. "Territorial Commerce Associates," he said. "I'll find out who owns it by end of week. My guess is it's Wesley Cole through 2 or 3 layers of intermediary." He looked at the letter again. "This is the next move. He can't get your land through marriage, so he's going to try to get it through debt. If he can establish a legal claim against your property, even a fraudulent one, he can tie you up in court proceedings long enough to either force a settlement or make you sell. He needs a signature," she said. "He said it was a loan I took out. That means there's a document somewhere with my name on it." "Yes." "Which means it's forged." "Yes." "Can we prove that?" Henry looked at her steadily. "Do you have samples of your handwriting going back 18 months? She almost laughed. "I have samples of my handwriting going back 6 years, she said. "I have receipts, order books, correspondence, 2 contracts for sewing services, all of it dated and signed." "Good," Henry said. "Then we can prove it." He paused. "Evelyn, this man is not going to stop until you stop him. You understand that?" "I understand it," she said. "That's why I came to you. I'm going to need everything you have, every document, every record. Bring it all to me this week." "I'll bring it tomorrow morning," she said. She stood up to go. At the door, Henry said, "Evelyn." She turned. "Your father was one of the most honest men I ever dealt with," he said. "He would be very proud of you right now." She didn't trust her voice for a moment. "Thank you, Henry," she said, and she walked out. She was back at her shop by noon, and she had been working for an hour when the door opened and she looked up and found Clara Devlin standing in it. Clara, who had turned to look at a millinery window 3 weeks ago rather than acknowledge her on the street. Clara, who had not sent word, not visited, not so much as a note in the weeks since the wedding. Clara, who had sat beside her at her father's funeral and held her hand, and whom she had trusted with things she didn't tell Ruth. Clara looked like someone who had been building up to something for a long time and was no longer confident it was going to come out right. "May I come in?" she asked. "The door's open," Evelyn said. She kept working. Clara came in and stood on the other side of the cutting table and looked at her hands. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You owe me more than that," Evelyn said. "Not unkindly, honestly." Clara flinched. "I know. I was Evelyn. My husband has a business arrangement with Wesley Cole. A contract. I was afraid that Wesley would pull the contract if you stood up for me." "Yes." Evelyn set down her scissors and looked at her friend. Former friend. Possibly current friend again. She wasn't sure yet. Did Wesley threaten that? He didn't have to. Robert assumed it without being told. Clara pressed her lips together. "Robert told me to stay away from you. And I did. And I have felt sick about it every single day." Evelyn looked at her. Clara was not a dishonest woman. She was a woman married to a man who made decisions and expected them to be followed, which was a different kind of problem than dishonesty, but not a simple one. "What changed?" Evelyn asked. "Dorothy Haynes told Margaret Pierce about seeing Wesley Cole with the railway man in Billings." Clara said it quietly. "And Margaret told Robert. And Robert got very quiet the way he gets when he's realized he's been on the wrong side of something." She looked up. "Robert told me to come and see you." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So Robert sent you?" "Robert sent me," Clara agreed. "But I wanted to come. That part was mine." Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. Clara was not wrong. The wanting had been there regardless of what Robert decided. She could see it. "Tell Robert," she said slowly, "that if he has information about Wesley Cole's railway dealings, Henry Alcott would like to hear it." Clara blinked. "You're already working with Henry." "Since this morning." Something shifted in Clara's expression. Relief and something that looked a lot like respect. "All right," she said. "I'll tell him. And Clara." Evelyn picked her scissors back up. "Sit down if you want. I've got 3 hours of hemming to do and the company would be welcome." Clara Devlin sat down. She didn't say anything for a minute, and then she said, "I really am sorry, Evelyn." "I know," Evelyn said. "Hand me that spool of thread." Caleb Mercer came by the shop himself on the last Friday of September, which was unusual. He typically sent Holt with the orders, and she had assumed this was simply the arrangement they'd settled into. She looked up when he came through the door, and felt the particular alertness she always felt in his presence. The sense of someone who occupied space with deliberate intention. "Mr. Mercer," she said. "Miss Whitmore, I was in town and wanted to bring the next order myself." He set the list on the table. She didn't look at it yet. "Daniel said you talked about me," she said. He looked at her directly the way he always did. "Did he tell you what I said?" "He told me exactly what you said." "Then I stand by it." No hesitation, no deflection. "I also came because I heard about the debt notice." She went still. "How did you hear about that?" "Henry Alcott is a friend of mine," he said. "He didn't share the contents. He simply mentioned that you'd come to see him, and that the situation was developing in a way that might benefit from more people knowing about it." He paused. "I know who owns Territorial Commerce Associates." She set her scissors down. "Tell me." "It's Wesley Cole, 2 layers back through a holding company registered in Missouri. I found this out because he tried the same instrument on a rancher in Chouteau County 18 months ago. Different name, same structure, same billings attorney." He held her gaze. "The rancher in Chouteau County sold. He didn't know it was fraudulent. He just knew he couldn't afford to fight it." The room was very quiet for a moment. "Wesley has done this before." She said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, multiple times. At least twice that I know of, possibly more." She breathed through that. "Let it settle. You've been investigating him." "I've been paying attention," Caleb said. "There's a difference. I had a reason to pay attention before any of this started with you." He stopped there, and she had the sense he was choosing what to say next very carefully. "The rancher in Chouteau County was my brother-in-law," he said. "Wesley Cole used the same method to take land my sister's husband had worked for 20 years. By the time I understood what had happened, it was done." She looked at him, at the steady set of his face and the controlled quality of what he was holding behind it. That's why you recognized him, she said. That's why you knew at the altar. Yes. And you didn't say anything beforehand because I didn't know he was the same man until I walked into that church and saw his face. He said it flat. Not defensive, just true. I knew the name Wesley Cole from what happened to my brother-in-law, but I'd never seen the man. He uses different names in different territories, Evelyn. He's very careful about that. She sat back. The shape of what she was dealing with was larger than she'd understood. A man who moved through territories, who changed his name, who had done this before, and would do it again, who was doing it right now to her, with a forged debt notice sitting in Henry Alcott's desk. What name did he use in Chouteau County? She asked. William Sutton, Caleb said. She nodded slowly. Henry needs to know this. I'll talk to Henry myself this afternoon. He paused. There's something else. Tell me. The railway survey is real. The route they're planning runs directly across the northeast corner of your property. I have a friend on the survey team. The company plans to make a formal announcement in October 6 weeks from now. He looked at her steadily. Which means Wesley Cole is running out of time to secure your land through informal means, and he's going to start moving faster. She felt it then, not fear exactly, but the particular alertness of a woman who understands that the ground is shifting under her and she needs to be sure of her footing. He's going to escalate, she said. He's going to escalate, Caleb agreed. She stood up from the cutting table, walked to the window. Silver Creek was going about its October business, outside someone crossing the street with a bundle the stage from Billings coming in at the end of the block, ordinary life, unaware of any of it. Then she turned back and looked at Caleb Mercer. This man who had stood on the church steps when everyone else stayed sitting, who had brought work to her door when her order book was bleeding, who had just told her the thing he'd been carrying about his brother-in-law and his sister's land. Why are you helping me? She asked. Not suspicious, just needing to know. I was quiet for a moment. Then, because Wesley Cole took something from my family, and I couldn't stop it. And because you are not going to let him take something from yours, and I would like to help make sure he doesn't. He picked up his hat from the table. And because, he said more quietly, you are the most clear-eyed, unbendable person I have met in a very long time, and I find I want to see what you do with what you've got. She held his gaze. He didn't look away. All right, Mr. Mercer, she said. Then here's what I've got. She walked to the shelf and took down the box with the wedding papers, the debt notice, the 6 years of business records, the handwriting samples going back further than Wesley Cole had known to plan for. She put it on the cutting table between them and opened it. Sit down, she said. We've got work to do. They worked at her cutting table until the lamp needed refilling. Caleb went through the box, the way he went through everything methodically, without rushing, without performing efficiency, the way some men did when they wanted you to notice how capable they were. He simply worked. He read each document, set it in the right pile, moved to the next. Evelyn sat across from him and answered questions when he asked them, and watched the picture assemble itself between them, like a quilt coming together from pieces that had been cut separately. The wedding papers, the debt notice, her 6 years of receipts, the order books with her signature on every page, 2 contracts in her handwriting, a letter to the Territorial Land Office confirming her ownership dated 3 years back. And the thing she hadn't shown Henry yet, a second document she had found 2 nights ago, folded inside the original property transfer, smaller, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. A letter of intent, unsigned, between Territorial Commerce Associates and something called the Northern Montana Railway Consortium, referencing a parcel on the north edge of Silver Creek by the exact dimensions of her land. Caleb read that one twice. Where did you find this? He said. Inside the property transfer, folded into the back page. I think he put it there by mistake, or he assumed I'd never look that carefully because I'd be too upset to read the fine print. Caleb set it down with the particular controlled stillness of a man who was very angry and had long practice managing it. This is a letter of intent for a sale, he said. He had already agreed to sell your land to the railway company before the wedding. Before the wedding, she confirmed. Before I signed anything, before I said yes. Which means he wasn't just planning to take your land. He had already committed to a buyer. He had already made a deal. Caleb looked at her. Evelyn, this isn't just fraud. This is a chain of transactions that were never going to work without your signature, which means every step of the courtship, the engagement, all of it was staged to obtain a document he needed to fulfill a contract he'd already signed. She had known this. She had known it since the night she sat at this table and worked it out alone. But hearing it said plainly in someone else's voice in the specific legal language of what it actually was, it landed differently than her own private knowledge of it. It landed in the place where the grief still lived underneath the strategy and the stubbornness, where the woman who had sewn her own wedding dress and believed she had finally earned something beautiful still existed and still hurt. She breathed through it. Caleb watched her do it without comment, without rushing her, without filling the silence with something that didn't need to be said. "All right," she said. "What do we do with it?" "We take everything to Henry tomorrow morning," he said. "First thing. This letter changes the nature of what Henry can argue. It establishes premeditation. It establishes that Wesley Cole entered into a fraudulent contract before he obtained your consent, which makes everything downstream of it, the debt notice, the forged loan documents, the public slander part of a single coordinated scheme." He paused. "That's a criminal matter, Evelyn. Not just a civil one." She absorbed that. He could go to prison. If the territorial prosecutor decides to pursue it, which Henry will make sure he has every reason to. She looked at the letter of intent sitting on her cutting table. The paper was ordinary. The handwriting was neat. It looked like any business correspondence, except that it represented 18 months of calculated deception aimed at a woman who had done nothing except own the right piece of land at the right moment. "His name isn't Wesley Cole," she said. "Not his real name. He used William Sutton in Chouteau County." "I know." "Which means there are likely other names, other counties, other women or men who owned land he wanted and couldn't get through honest means." "Yes. Then whatever Henry does, he needs to do it in a way that finds those other cases. Because I don't want to just stop him here. I want him stopped." She said it quietly, but it came out with the particular weight of something decided, rather than just felt. Caleb looked at her for a moment. "Henry knows a federal land commissioner in Helena," he said. "If this goes federal, they have the reach to find the other cases." "Good," she said. "That's what we're going to do then." They were at Henry Alcott's office the next morning, before he had fully settled into his chair, and Henry, to his credit, took one look at their faces and sent his clerk out for coffee before anyone said a word. When Evelyn spread the letter of intent on his desk, Henry picked it up, read it, set it down, and was quiet for what felt like a very long time. "Where was this?" he asked finally. "Inside the property transfer, folded into the back page." Henry looked at Caleb. Caleb said, "I believe you know what we're looking at." "I believe I do," Henry said. He leaned back in his chair. "This changes everything." "That's what I told her," Caleb said. "No, I mean it changes everything immediately. Wesley Cole has a contractual obligation to the railway company. He promised to deliver title to this land by a specific date." Henry tapped the letter. "There's no date on this copy, but I can find out when the sale was supposed to close. If it's before October, before the railway makes its public announcement, then he is already running significantly behind, and a man who's behind on a fraudulent contract is a man who's going to make desperate moves." He looked at Evelyn. "Has he contacted you again since the visit to your shop?" "Not directly. But 3 of my remaining customers received letters this week suggesting my business was not financially sound, and that they might wish to reconsider their arrangements with me." She kept her voice level. "I have the letters. 2 of the women brought them to me directly." Henry's jaw tightened. "Interference with your business relationships. That adds to the pattern." He stood up and went to his filing cabinet and produced a folder that Evelyn recognized it was the file he'd been building on Wesley Cole since their first meeting. It was thicker than she'd expected. "I've been doing my own research," Henry said, returning to the desk. "I wrote to colleagues in Billings in Helena and in the territorial capital. Wesley Cole, under various names, has a history in 3 territories. He's been operating this scheme for at least 7 years. Evelyn heard Caleb go very still beside her. 7 years, she said. At minimum. The earliest case I can document is 1882 in Wyoming. A widow named Agnes Farrow. She lost 80 acres that turned out to be directly adjacent to a mining claim that paid out enormously the following year. Henry looked at both of them. There are at least 6 cases I can identify, possibly more. In every case, the target was a property owner, usually a woman, usually alone, usually with land that had value they didn't fully understand yet. In every case, Wesley used either marriage or fraudulent debt instruments to force the transfer. In 2 cases, both, Caleb said very quietly. Agnes Farrow was my mother's cousin. Henry looked at him. I didn't know the details, Caleb said. I knew she lost her land under suspicious circumstances. I knew about my brother-in-law in Chouteau County. I didn't know there were 6. He was quiet for a moment. 7 years. The weight of it sat in Henry's office like a third presence. A man who had spent 7 years moving through territories, changing his name, finding women who owned land worth taking, and dismantling their lives one careful piece at a time. And not one of them had been able to stop him, because each one had faced him alone, without knowing about the others, without the thread that connected all of it. Until now. I want to write to Agnes Farrow, Evelyn said. Both men looked at her. And to your brother-in-law, she said to Caleb. And to anyone else Henry can find. Because if we're going to do this right, if we're going to stop him completely, not just in Silver Creek, but everywhere, we need the other cases. We need their documentation. She looked at Henry. A federal case is stronger with 6 complaints than with 1. Henry Alcott looked at her for a long moment. Then he said slowly, You are your father's daughter, Evelyn. I'll take that as an agreement, she said. Start writing. The letters went out that week. Henry wrote in his precise attorney's hand to his colleagues in Wyoming, Colorado, and Dakota Territory, requesting contact information for the individuals affected by the cases he'd identified. Evelyn wrote personal letters to the 2 women whose names Henry had found: Agnes Farrow in Wyoming and a woman named Pearl Ingram in Colorado, introducing herself, explaining briefly what had happened to her, and asking if they would be willing to share their own experiences for the purposes of a legal action she was building. She wrote those letters at her kitchen table late at night after the sewing was done, and she wrote them carefully because she understood that she was asking strangers to open wounds they might have spent years closing, and that deserved care. She told them the truth about what had happened to her. She told them they were not alone, and had not been alone, which she thought might matter to them the way it had mattered to her when she first understood it. She sealed the envelopes herself and walked them to the post office herself and stood at the counter while Jim Pearson stamped them, and did not ask her why she was mailing letters to Wyoming and Colorado, although she could see the question forming behind his eyes. She was back at the shop by 9 in the morning. Caleb was waiting outside. He had not said he would come. He had not made arrangements to meet her. He was simply there the way he had been on the church steps, not inserting himself, not demanding acknowledgement, just present because he had decided that being present was the right thing, and that was reason enough. The letters are sent, she said. Good. He fell into step beside her as she unlocked the shop. I have something to tell you. She pushed the door open and let them both inside. Tell me. I spoke to Robert Devlin last night, Clara's husband. He stayed near the door, hat in hand. He had a conversation with a man named Gerald Holt. Last spring, the notary in Billings who processed the property transfer documents. She turned around. Gerald Holt talked to Robert Devlin. Holt was in Silver Creek on unrelated business and ran into Robert at the hotel. He had too much whiskey and said things he probably regrets this morning. Caleb's expression was carefully neutral. He told Robert that he's notarized documents for Wesley Cole on 4 separate occasions across 2 territories, that he was paid significantly over standard rate for each one, and that 2 of those notarizations were for documents that were, his word, irregular. Meaning forged, Evelyn said. Meaning forged. She pressed her hands flat on the cutting table. Gerald Holt, the notary whose stamp was on the debt notice sitting in Henry's desk. A man who had been paid to legitimize fraudulent documents, and who had, in a moment of whiskey-loosened conscience or whiskey-loosened stupidity, said too much to the wrong man in a hotel bar. Would Robert testify to that? She asked. He will if he doesn't want Clara to find out what else he told me last night, Caleb said. And then at her look, I'm not threatening him. He told me voluntarily. He's been carrying it since the wedding and he wants to make it right. The Devlin contract with Wesley Cole expires at the end of the year, and Robert's been looking for a way out of the association without losing money on it. He paused. I told him I'd speak to Henry about whether there was a way to structure his testimony that protected his business interests while still being useful to the case. She looked at him. You negotiated that. I suggested it was possible, he said. Henry will have to confirm it. She thought about Robert Devlin, a man who had made his wife turn away from a friend on the street because of a business contract, who had been on the wrong side of this thing from the beginning, who was now apparently willing to be useful because being useful served his interests. She didn't particularly like him. She didn't need to. Get Robert to Henry this week, she said, before Gerald Holt sobers up and remembers what he said. They had been building the case for 12 days. 12 days of letters and meetings, and the careful grinding work of legal preparation. When Wesley Cole walked into her shop for the second time. This time, he didn't come alone. He came with a man she didn't know taller than Wesley, with the flat, watchful eyes of someone who was paid to look at situations and assess them rather than feel them. A lawyer, she thought, or something adjacent to one. The kind of man Wesley brought when he wanted to signal that the casual conversation phase was over. Evelyn. Wesley was still smooth, still composed. The weeks had not visibly troubled him. I'd like to introduce you to Carl Marsh. He represents Territorial Commerce Associates. I know what Territorial Commerce Associates is, she said. She did not offer her hand to Carl Marsh. She did not invite either of them to sit. Carl Marsh opened the leather case he was carrying and produced a document which he set on her cutting table. Miss Whitmore, this is a formal demand for payment of the outstanding debt of $430, plus accrued interest, for a total of $462. You have 30 days to satisfy this obligation, after which Territorial Commerce Associates will pursue legal remedies, including a claim against your property. She looked at the document. She looked at Carl Marsh. She looked at Wesley Cole. The signature on that loan document is forged, she said. Carl Marsh didn't blink. The document is notarized. The notary is Gerald Holt of Billings, who has been paid over standard rate to notarize documents he knew to be irregular. I believe the precise word he used was irregular. She watched Wesley's face for the first fraction of a second when he processed what she had just said, and she saw it just barely, just enough the slightest tightening around his eyes. I also believe you are aware, she continued, that I have the original property transfer you tried to have me sign at the altar, including the letter of intent, folded into the back page, referencing the Northern Montana Railway Consortium. That letter was written before our wedding, before I signed anything, before I consented to anything. She picked up Carl Marsh's demand letter and held it out to him. Take this back. Carl Marsh took it. His expression was professionally neutral, but she noticed he looked at Wesley before he put it back in his case, and Wesley was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Something behind the composure, something that was working to stay behind it. You've been busy, Wesley said. I have, she said. So have a lot of people. You might be surprised how many of them are willing to talk given the right conversation. Evelyn. He took a step toward the table. I want you to think carefully about what you're doing. The railway announcement is going to change the value of your land significantly. I can offer you fair market value right now before the announcement, more than you'd get from anyone else, more than this land has ever been worth to you. A clean transaction documented properly, and you walk away from all of this. He spread his hands. No case, no court, no years of expensive legal proceedings, just a fair price and a clean ending. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about Agnes Farrow in Wyoming. She thought about Caleb's brother-in-law in Chouteau County, who had worked his land for 20 years and lost it because he didn't know it was a fraudulent document he was fighting. She thought about Pearl Ingram in Colorado, whose letter she didn't have yet, who might or might not write back, who had been going through some version of this alone for years. My father built this land, she said. He worked it and held it and gave it to me because he believed a Whitmore would hold it after him. I have never once considered selling. I am not considering it now." She looked at Wesley Cole without blinking. "And when this is over, when the federal commissioner has finished looking at 7 years of your work across 3 territories, you're not going to be in a position to offer anyone anything. Get out of my shop." Wesley Cole looked at her. The smooth surface held, but there was something underneath it now that hadn't been there the first time. He'd stood in this room, something tighter, something that knew it was running out of room. He picked up his hat. He buttoned his jacket. "Carl," he said. They walked out. The bell rang. Evelyn stood at her cutting table and breathed. Then she picked up her coat and walked to Henry Alcott's office at a pace that was almost running. Henry was already in conference when she arrived. She could hear voices through the closed door, and his clerk, a young man named Samuel, looked up with the expression of someone who was about to ask her to wait. "Tell him Evelyn Whitmore is here," she said. "Tell him it's urgent." Samuel disappeared behind the door. She heard Henry's voice, a murmur of something, and then the door opened, and Henry appeared. Behind him, she could see Robert Devlin sitting in one of the chairs, looking like a man halfway through doing the right thing and not entirely comfortable with the altitude. "He came to the shop," she said, "with a lawyer named Carl Marsh from Territorial Commerce Associates. They presented a formal demand, 30 days. Henry's expression sharpened. "Did they serve it officially?" "He tried. I declined it." She paused. "I told them about Gerald Holt." Henry went very still. "You told them you knew about Gerald Holt?" "Yes." "Evelyn." "I know," she said. "But I needed to see his face, and I needed him to know that the careful part is over." She looked at Henry steadily. "He's going to move faster now, which means we need to move faster." Henry looked at her for a moment. Then he turned back to the doorway. "Robert," he called, "I think we need to speed up this conversation considerably." Robert Devlin stood up. He looked at Evelyn with the particular expression of a man who knows he owes a debt he's just been given an opportunity to start paying. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I'm sorry it took me this long." "It took you as long as it took," she said. "Are you ready to talk to Henry about what Holt told you?" "Yes." "Then sit back down," she said. "We've got a lot of ground to cover and not much time." The letter from Pearl Ingram arrived on a Wednesday, 11 days after Evelyn had sent hers. It was 3 pages closely written in the handwriting of a woman who had a lot to say and had been waiting for someone to give her a reason to say it. Pearl Ingram was 54 years old, a rancher in eastern Colorado, and she had lost 120 acres to a man named Thomas Blackwell in 1884, a man she now understood reading Evelyn's letter to be the same individual currently operating in Silver Creek under the name Wesley Cole. Pearl had documentation. She had kept everything the same way. Evelyn had kept everything because she had never quite believed the debt claim against her was legitimate, but hadn't had anyone to help her prove it. She had a notarized document that she had always suspected was fraudulent. She had correspondence. She had the names of 2 witnesses who had seen Thomas Blackwell meeting with a land speculator 6 months before he began courting her. At the bottom of the 3rd page, Pearl Ingram had written, "I have prayed for 3 years that someone would find the thread that connected all of it. I believe you have found it. Tell me what you need, and I will send it." Evelyn read the letter twice, sitting at her kitchen table in the early morning before the shop opened. Then she folded it carefully and added it to the box that was now too full for its original purpose and needed a larger one. She was at Henry's office when he arrived to open it, standing on the step with the letter in her hand. He read it on the doorstep. When he finished, he looked up, and she saw in his face the same thing she had felt reading it, the click of a thing finally fully understood. The shape of the hole. "Agnes Farrow wrote too," she said. "Her letter came yesterday. She has documentation from 1882 in Wyoming. A man named Arthur Wells." She paused. "Same structure, same method, same notary stamp from Billings. Gerald Holt has been working with him since 1882, Henry said. At least. Howe was quiet for a moment, standing in the doorway of his office with 2 letters in his hand that represented 9 years of a man's work and the lives he'd dismantled to do it. Then he said, "I'm writing to the Federal Land Commissioner in Helena today. I'm sending copies of everything. I'm requesting an emergency injunction against any property transfer involving your land pending investigation." "How long will that take?" "The injunction, if I frame it right, 3 days. 4 at most." He looked at her. "The investigation will take longer. Months possibly." "But he can't touch my land while it's under injunction." "Not legally, no." "Then do it," she said. "Today." He did. She stayed and helped him draft it, which was not something clients typically did, but Henry did not suggest she leave, because he understood by now that Evelyn Whitmore was not the kind of woman who waited in another room while her own case was being built. She read every sentence. She corrected 2 things. She signed where he told her to sign. When it was done, Henry sealed it and handed it to Samuel with instructions to get it on the noon stage to Helena without fail. Samuel left at a run. Henry sat back in his chair and looked at Evelyn. "He's going to find out about the injunction request the moment the stage leaves," he said. "He has contacts everywhere. He's going to know what we've filed." "I know." "He's going to come at you hard, Evelyn. Harder than he has so far." "I know that too," she said. "Let him come." What Wesley Cole did next, nobody had predicted. He didn't come to her shop. He didn't send Carl Marsh. He didn't file a counterclaim or make a public statement or do any of the things that Henry had been preparing for. Instead, he went to Caleb Mercer. Caleb told her about it that evening. He had come to the shop after closing time, knocked 3 times the way he always did, and when she opened the door, he came in and sat in the chair across from her cutting table and looked at her with an expression that told her before he spoke that the thing he was about to say was going to require her to be very steady. "He came to the ranch this afternoon," Caleb said. She set down her sewing. "Wesley. With Carl Marsh. They were on my property for approximately 45 minutes. He paused. "He offered me a partnership." She stared at him. "A financial partnership in the railway land transaction," Caleb said. "He told me he knew I'd been helping you build a case against him. He said he respected it. Those were his exact words. He respected it, and he said he thought I was a practical man who would appreciate a practical offer." He looked at her steadily. "He said if I withdrew from your case and convinced you to accept a sale price for the land, he would cut me in for 15% of the transaction, which, given what the railway is going to pay, is a significant amount of money." The silence in the room had its own weight. "What did you say?" she asked. She kept her voice very even. "I told him to get off my land," Caleb said. "And I told him that if he came back, I'd have the sheriff waiting." She breathed. "He thinks everyone has a price." "He's built his whole operation on that assumption," Caleb said. "It's worked for 9 years. It's not going to work here." "No," Caleb said. "It's not." He looked at her. "But Evelyn, him coming to me means he's frightened. A man who isn't frightened doesn't offer partnerships. He just moves ahead with his plan." He paused. "He knows about Helena. He knows about the injunction request. And he knows his timeline is collapsing." "Good," she said. "A frightened man makes bigger mistakes. He also makes more dangerous ones." She met his eyes. "Are you frightened?" she asked. Howe was quiet for a moment. Then, "Not for myself," he said. She understood what he wasn't saying. She understood it fully with the particular clarity that had been building in her since the morning of the wedding, or before that, maybe since the night she first understood what railway surveys and property transfer clauses meant and sat alone at her table and decided she was not going to be broken by this. "I'll be all right," she said. "I know you will," he said. "I just want to make sure you're not being all right alone." She looked at him. This man who had never once in all these weeks told her what to do, or how to feel, or suggested that her situation required a man to solve it. Who had stood on church steps and brought work to her door and sat at her table going through documents and gone to Henry and written to his contacts and told her about his sister's husband without making it about himself. Who had just turned down 15% of a railway transaction because he was not the kind of man who had a price. "I'm not alone," she said. It came out quieter than she intended. Something shifted in Caleb Mercer's face. Not a smile, something quieter than that, and more permanent. He nodded once, picked up his hat, and stood. "The injunction will come through," he said. "When it does, Wesley Cole is going to have to decide whether to fight it in court or run. And if he fights it, Henry will have 3 women's testimony and a notary who's already said too much at a hotel bar." He turned his hat in his hands. "He's going to run, Evelyn. I think he's going to run, and when he does, the federal commissioner is going to be ready." "Henry will make sure of it," she said. "Yes." He started for the door. "Lock up tonight," he said. "All the windows." "I always do," she said. "I know," he said. "I know you do." He left. The bell rang once and went quiet. Evelyn sat alone in her workroom with the lamp burning low and the box of documents on the shelf above her head, and the letter from Pearl Ingram folded in the pocket of her apron where she had been carrying it all day, like something that mattered because it did. She picked up her sewing and threaded her needle and set the first stitch. Outside Silver Creek went on being Silver Creek. And inside Evelyn Whitmore's workroom, everything that was going to save her was already in place, already building, already running toward the moment when Wesley Cole would finally understand that some women you cannot break, no matter how long you work at it, no matter how carefully you plan, no matter what you say at an altar in front of a church full of people who should have known better. She kept sewing. The lamp burned, the night held, and somewhere in Helena. On the afternoon stage, a sealed envelope from Henry Alcott was moving toward the office of a federal land commissioner who was about to read a name he had been looking for across 3 territories for a very long time. The injunction came through in 4 days. Henry brought the papers to her shop himself, arriving on a Thursday morning before she had opened the front door, knocking with the particular urgency of a man carrying good news he has been holding since the previous evening and can no longer contain. She let him in, still holding her coffee, and he spread the document on her cutting table and pointed to the seal at the bottom. The territorial court seal, the federal commissioner's signature, the date. "No transfer of the property can proceed pending investigation," Henry said. "Not a sale, not a debt claim, not a forced auction, nothing. Wesley Cole cannot legally touch your land until this case is resolved." She read it twice. Then she set her coffee down and pressed both hands flat on the document and felt something move through her that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite triumph. Something older than both of those things. Something that lived in the part of her that had been carrying this alone since the morning she found those papers folded on her kitchen table. "He can't take it," she said. "He cannot take it," Henry confirmed. "Not now. Not through any legal mechanism he has available. What will he do?" Henry's expression shifted slightly. "That's what concerns me. A man like Wesley Cole, with a contractual obligation to the railway company, he can no longer fulfill facing a federal investigation. He has very few options remaining. He can run, he can fight, or he can do something reckless." Henry looked at her steadily. "I don't want you to be alone at the property, Evelyn. Not until this is fully resolved." She wanted to tell him she'd been alone on that property for 6 years and had managed fine. But she understood what he was actually saying, and she was not so stubborn as to argue with a man who had been practicing law for 40 years about the behavior of cornered men. "I'll talk to Caleb," she said. "Good." Henry picked up the papers and handed them to her. "Your copy. Keep it with everything else." He paused at the door. "The federal commissioner is sending an investigator. He arrives Monday." She looked up. "Monday, 4 days." 4 days, Henry said. "Which means Wesley Cole has 4 days to decide what he's going to do." He put his hat on. "Lock your doors, Evelyn." "You're the second person who's told me that recently," she said. "Then listen to us both." She sent word to Caleb through Holt Thomas. That same morning, a brief note, just the facts, the injunction and Henry's concern, and the investigator arriving Monday. Holt took it without asking questions, which she appreciated, and was back at her shop by noon with Caleb's reply written in his careful, unhurried hand. "I'll have 2 men at your property each night starting tonight. You won't know they're there unless you need them. CM." She read it standing at her cutting table. Then she folded it and put it in her apron pocket beside Pearl Ingram's letter and went back to work. That afternoon, the town began to talk. She wasn't sure exactly when the news of the injunction spread. Henry had filed it with the territorial court, which meant it was a public record, which meant anyone who went to the courthouse and asked could find it. But by the time she closed the shop at 5 o'clock and walked to the post office, she could feel it in the quality of the attention on the street. People looked at her differently. Not all of them, and not dramatically, but differently enough that she noticed. 2 women who had crossed the street to avoid her 3 weeks ago now nodded when she passed. Jim Pearson behind his counter at the general store said, "Afternoon, Miss Whitmore," with a warmth that had been absent since August. It was a small thing. She didn't let herself make too much of it, but she filed it away. She was almost back to her shop when Harold Briggs fell into step beside her. She kept walking. "Harold," she said. "Evelyn." He was a bit Harold Briggs, and he walked with the particular discomfort of someone who was about to say something he'd spent a while working up to. "I hear there's been some developments, legal developments." "There have," she said. "I also hear, and I want to be straight with you about this, because your father was a man I respected. I also hear that Wesley Cole may not be entirely who he represented himself to be." "He is not remotely who he represented himself to be," she said pleasantly. Harold was quiet for a moment. Then, "I owe you an apology, Evelyn, for what I said in the church, about you not denying the debts." She stopped walking, turned to look at him. Harold Briggs was 60 years old and had been in Silver Creek his entire life, and was not a bad man. Not essentially, he was a man who had made a bad calculation and was now watching the numbers shift, recalculating. She understood the mathematics of it. She had understood it from the beginning. "Are you apologizing," she said, "because you believe you were wrong, or because you've decided it's safer to be on my side than his?" Harold had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Both, if I'm honest about it." She considered that. Honesty, even belated and self-interested honesty, was worth something. "All right, Harold," she said. "I accept your apology." She started walking again. "Tell Tom he can bring the mending back if he wants to." Friday passed quietly. Too quietly in the way of days before a storm. Everything normal on the surface and underneath it. The particular tension of waiting for the thing you know is coming without knowing exactly what form it will take. On Saturday morning, it took the form of Gerald Holt. The notary from Billings arrived at her shop just after 8 without warning, without an appointment, and he looked like a man who had not slept in several days. He was smaller than she had imagined from his name, slight middle-aged, with the reddened eyes of someone who had been doing a great deal of drinking and then abruptly stopped. He stood in her doorway and turned his hat in his hands and said, "Miss Whitmore, my name is Gerald Holt. I believe you know who I am." "I do," she said. "Come in." He came in. He would not sit. He stood in the middle of her workroom and looked at his hat and said, "I understand there's a federal investigator coming Monday." "That's correct." "I want—" He stopped, started again. "I understand there may be the possibility of cooperation with the investigation in exchange for some consideration regarding my own." "You want to know if you can make a deal," she said. He looked up. Yes, she studied him. Gerald Holt had notarized fraudulent documents for 9 years. He had helped Wesley Cole destroy people's lives in 3 territories and had been paid well to do it. She did not feel sorry for him. She also understood that Gerald Holt walking into the federal investigation with full cooperation and documentary evidence of every transaction he had processed was worth considerably more to the case than Gerald Holt being prosecuted alongside Wesley Cole. "Henry Alcott is my attorney," she said. "You need to be in his office before noon today. You tell him everything, every document, every transaction, every name. Wesley Cole used every property he touched, every person he paid. Everything. And you bring whatever records you have." She held his gaze. "If you do that, Henry will talk to the commissioner's investigator on your behalf. I can't promise you anything beyond that. But cooperation is the only thing that gives you any ground to stand on." Gerald Holt swallowed. "He'll know I talked," he said. "Wesley will know." Wesley Cole is running out of territory to hide in, she said. You should be more concerned about what happens to you if you don't talk. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded a small defeated motion, the nod of a man who has exhausted all his other options. Before noon, he said. Before noon, she confirmed. He left. She stood at her cutting table and breathed through the particular feeling of watching a piece of the case lock into place, and then she sent a note to Henry saying Gerald Holt was coming and to be ready. Henry's reply came back within the hour, I will be ready. Well done. H.A. She did not hear from Wesley Cole on Saturday. She did not hear from him Sunday morning. Sunday afternoon. She was at her kitchen table writing a second letter to Pearl Ingram, updating her on the injunction on the investigator on Gerald Holt. When Ruth arrived breathless in the way she was only breathless when something had happened that she considered genuinely alarming. She came through the door without knocking, which was how Evelyn knew immediately it was serious. He's leaving, Ruth said. Evelyn set her pen down. What? Wesley Cole. He checked out of the hotel this morning. His things are gone. His horse is gone. Carl Marsh left on the Friday stage and Wesley. Ruth pressed a hand to her chest. Evelyn, I think he's running. She was on her feet before Ruth finished the sentence, reaching for her coat. Where are you going? To Henry, she said. She walked fast enough that it was nearly running, and she did not care who saw her, and the Sunday afternoon street watched her pass with the curiosity of a town that had been following the developments of her situation, the way people followed weather closely because it affected them, and with the dawning awareness that the storm was breaking in a direction they hadn't fully anticipated. Henry answered his door in his Sunday clothes, which meant he had been home rather than at the office, and his expression when he saw her face told her he had already heard. I know, he said, stepping back to let her in. Samuel came to find me 20 minutes ago. Wesley Cole checked out of the hotel at 10 this morning. He's running. He may be running, Henry said. He may also be repositioning. He has resources and contacts in multiple territories. Running and repositioning can look identical at the beginning. Does it matter he's gone? It matters because the investigation continues regardless of where he is. It matters because the federal commissioner now has 6 documented cases across 3 territories and a notary, who is currently, I am told, sitting in my office waiting for me despite it being Sunday. Henry looked at her. Gerald Holt came. I told him before noon, she said. He came at 11:30 with a leather satchel full of copies, Henry said. Every transaction, every document, every name. He paused. Evelyn. He has records going back to 1881, a full year before the Agnes Farrow case. There are 8 cases, not 6. 8 properties, 8 victims, 8 fraudulent notarizations, and in 2 of the cases, forged documents that also carry the signature of a Territorial Land Office employee who is currently still employed in that capacity. The room went very quiet. There's corruption inside the land office, she said. Wesley Cole did not do this alone, Henry said. He had help from inside the territorial government, which is why he was able to do it for so long without being caught. He sat down heavily. This is bigger than I anticipated. She sat down across from him. The shape of the thing kept expanding every time she thought she had its full dimensions. 9 years, 3 territories, 8 properties, a notary, a land office employee, a railway company that had purchased land in good faith from a man who had no legitimate title to sell. All of it radiating outward from a single woman in Silver Creek, Montana, who had refused to sign a piece of paper at her own wedding. What happens now? She asked. The investigator arrives Monday as planned. Gerald Holt will give a full statement. I will present everything we have, your documentation. Agnes Farrow's, Pearl Ingram's, Robert Devlin's testimony about what Holt said at the hotel, Caleb's information about his brother-in-law. Henry folded his hands. And we will let the federal machinery do what it does. And my land is protected by the injunction until the case is fully resolved, no matter where Wesley Cole is. He looked at her steadily. Your land is safe, Evelyn. She heard those words land in the particular part of her that had been holding tension since the morning she found those papers on her kitchen table, or before that. Maybe since the moment at the altar, when she had looked at the man she was about to marry, and finally seen him clearly. The tension didn't release all at once. It released slowly like a seam that's been under pressure, gradually relaxing when the weight is removed. "Good," she said. Simply, "Good." The federal investigator's name was James Carey, and he arrived on the Monday noon stage looking nothing like what Evelyn had expected. Short, compact, somewhere in his mid-40s, with the unremarkable face of a man who had spent a career being underestimated and had found it professionally useful. He shook her hand in Henry's office, with the direct efficiency of someone who had no interest in ceremony, and a great deal of interest in facts. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I've read the summary Mr. Alcott sent. I'd like to hear it from you directly." She told him everything. Chronologically, specifically, without embellishment, from the jacket brought in for repair 18 months ago to the Sunday morning Wesley Cole checked out of the hotel. She told it the way she had learned to tell it, stripped of the grief and the anger and the particular humiliation of the altar, because those were true, but they weren't useful. And what James Carey needed was the architecture of the thing, not the feeling of it. I took notes. He asked precise questions. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at what he'd written. "You kept everything," he said. "My father taught me to keep everything," she said. "Your father was right." He looked up. "I've been investigating land fraud in this territory for 6 years, Miss Whitmore. In my experience, cases like this fail for one of two reasons. Either the victim didn't document, or the scheme was too well constructed to unpick. You've removed both obstacles." He paused. "The man you know as Wesley Cole is wanted in Wyoming under the name Arthur Wells. We've been looking for him for 3 years." The room was very quiet. 3 years, she said. "We knew he existed. We had 2 of the cases, Agnes Farrow, a case in Dakota Territory. We didn't have enough to build on because by the time we found the thread he'd moved on and covered his tracks." Carey tapped his notes. "You pulled the thread, Miss Whitmore. You found the letter of intent. You contacted the other victims. You got the notary talking." He looked at her with the flat, appreciative gaze of a professional acknowledging another professional's work. "I want you to understand what that means. This isn't just your case anymore. This is 9 years of a man's criminal activity that is now going to be fully prosecuted in multiple territories using evidence that you assembled." She thought about Agnes Farrow, 60 years old, who had written 3 pages in a hand that shook slightly toward the end, who had said she had prayed for 3 years for someone to find the thread. She thought about Pearl Ingram with her 120 acres gone. She thought about Caleb's sister, whose husband had worked his land for 20 years. "Where is he?" she asked. "Wesley, do you know? We believe he headed south," Carey said. "Toward Colorado, possibly. He has contacts there." He paused. "He won't get far. Not now. We have his real name, his method, his network. Gerald Holt has given us enough to follow every transaction back to its source." He closed his notebook. "I expect we'll have him within the month." I was wrong about the month. It took 11 days. Henry came to her shop on a Tuesday morning with the particular expression he wore when he was carrying something significant and was being careful about how he carried it. Pleased, but controlled the way a man is pleased when the thing that happened is what he hoped would happen, but wasn't certain of. "They found him in Colorado," Henry said. "A town called Mesa Flats, 50 miles from the Wyoming border. He was using another name, David Crane, apparently. He'd already identified a property and had started the preliminary steps of a new scheme." Henry set his hat on the edge of the cutting table. "He was arrested Tuesday morning. Federal marshals. 2 charges to start with fraud and forgery in the Wyoming case, with additional charges pending from the Montana and Colorado investigations." Evelyn set down her scissors. "It's done," she said. "The arrest is done. The legal proceedings will take time. But the injunction on your property converts to a permanent order of protection once the criminal charges are filed, Henry stopped, laughed slightly, the laugh of an old man who had been practicing law for decades and still occasionally surprised himself. "Your land is yours, Evelyn. Officially, permanently, incontestably. No court in 3 territories is going to look at this case and find any legitimate claim against your property." She stood at her cutting table and looked at her hands. The calloused, ink-stained, strong hands of a woman who had been working since she was 15, who had held her father's land through 2 bad winters and a drought year, and a man who had spent 9 months constructing a careful trap around her. The hands that had sewn her own wedding dress. The hands that had pressed those papers back into Wesley Cole's chest at the altar instead of signing them. These hands. Everything had come down to what she had done and not done with these hands. "Thank you, Henry," she said. Her voice was steady. "Don't thank me," he said. "I wrote the letters and made the arguments. You built the case." He picked up his hat. "There's one more thing." She looked at him. "The railway company has been in contact," he said. "Northern Montana Railway Consortium. They are aware that their transaction with Wesley Cole, or Arthur Wells, or whatever name he was using when he negotiated with them, was fraudulent, and that they have no legitimate claim to your land." He paused. "They'd like to negotiate a proper easement, a legal one directly with you at fair market rate. Given the value of the route, fair market rate in this case is—" He named a figure. She stared at him. "For an easement only," Henry said. "Not a sale. You keep your land. They get the right to run track across the northeast corner. The money is yours outright, clean, no conditions." She was quiet for a long time. She thought about her father, about what he'd said when she was 12 years old, that Whitmore land would belong to Whitmores until the last one of them was in the ground. An easement wasn't a sale. The land stayed hers. The track would run across one corner of it, yes, but the land remained, and so did the deed, and so did everything her father had built and she had fought to keep. "Tell them yes," she said. "I'll draw up the paperwork," Henry said. "Henry." He stopped at the door. "Make sure Agnes Farrow's attorney knows about the Colorado charges, and Pearl Ingram's. They deserve to know it's over." "Already written," he said. "Posted yesterday." He left. The bell rang and went quiet, and Evelyn stood in her workroom alone for a long moment in the shop she had built in the town she had refused to leave, with the land outside Silver Creek, still hers and more valuable now than it had ever been in her father's lifetime. Then Ruth Hadley walked through the door without knocking, because Ruth never knocked when she knew something significant had happened, and she looked at Evelyn's face and said, "It's over, isn't it?" "It's over," Evelyn said. Ruth sat down in the chair across the cutting table and pressed her hands to her face and made a sound that was half laugh and half sob, and entirely Ruth. "I told everyone," she said through her hands. "Every single person I saw this morning, I told them. I said Evelyn Whitmore won. I said it loud." "You told people before you knew for certain." "I told them because I was certain." Ruth dropped her hands and looked at her with red eyes and a fiercely satisfied expression. "I have been certain since the morning you sat at your kitchen table and told me you were going to keep your land and your business and outlast Wesley Cole's story. I was certain then." Evelyn looked at her friend. This woman who had brought food and company and fierce loyal noise through every week of the worst months of her life. "Thank you, Ruth," she said, "for all of it." "Don't you get sentimental on me," Ruth said, already getting up, already moving, because sentiment required stillness, and Ruth was not built for stillness. "Get your coat. We're going to Pearson's, and you're buying sugar for a cake, because we are celebrating tonight, and I am not doing it without cake." Evelyn got her coat. The celebration was at Ruth's house, and it was small. Ruth and her husband Frank Henry and his wife Margaret Clara Devlin, who had been carefully finding her way back for 2 months and had gotten most of the way there, and Tom Briggs, who arrived with his hat in his hands and his father's apology on his lips and a jar of his mother's preserved peaches, because his mother, arthritic hands and all, had insisted on contributing something. It was the right size for what it was, not a triumph, not a spectacle, not the kind of event that made a story out of itself. Just people who had been part of something difficult, sitting together and being glad it was over. Caleb came late after 9, still in his work clothes. He stood in the doorway of Ruth's kitchen and looked across the room at Evelyn, and she looked back at him, and what passed between them in that moment did not need words and did not get them. He crossed the room and sat in the chair beside her, and Ruth put a plate in front of him without being asked, and the conversation continued around them, and for a while they just sat there together in the particular comfortable quiet of two people who have been through something together and don't need to narrate it. It was later, after Ruth's husband had gone to sleep, and Clara had gone home, and Henry had stood for 10 minutes at the door, saying goodbye the way lawyers did, that Caleb and Evelyn walked out into the October night together. The air was cold, the way Montana air went cold in October, clean and sharp with the promise of winter. Coming, the stars overhead so present, they felt almost close enough to reach. She told him about the easement offer from the railway company. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "What did you say?" "Yes," she said. "It's an easement, not a sale. The land stays mine." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father would have said yes to that." "I know," she said. "That's partly why I did." They walked a little further. The town was quiet around them. Silver Creek going about its October night the same and different from every night that had come before it. "Caleb," she said. "Yes." "When this all started, when you came to the shop that first Friday with the work order, did you know then how it was going to go?" I thought about it in the way he thought about everything, honestly, without rushing to give her an answer she'd like better than the true one. "I knew you weren't going to lose," he said. "I knew that from the church steps. I didn't know how or how long it would take. But I knew you weren't the kind of woman who loses something she's decided to keep." She looked at him. "You're the only person who knew that before I did." "No," he said. "I think you knew it. You just needed a few weeks to remember it." She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. The night was very still, and the stars were very bright, and Silver Creek lay quiet around them, the town that had watched her be destroyed at an altar and was now slowly recalibrating the way small places always did when the truth finally came through loud enough to settle the argument. "I'm not going to say thank you," she said, "because what you did wasn't charity, and it wasn't rescue, and I don't think it was even kindness exactly. I think it was just you being exactly who you are." "That's all I've got," he said. "It was enough," she said. "It was more than enough." He looked at her. The way he always looked at her, directly, without pretense, without the careful management of expression that most people used when they wanted something from her. He just looked at her the way a man looks when he is seeing exactly what is there and finds it to be the thing he most wanted to see. "Evelyn," he said. "I know," she said, quietly. "I know, Caleb." The night held them both, and Silver Creek breathed around them, and her father's 32 acres lay safe on the north edge of the valley, where it had always been, where it was going to stay, where no one was ever going to take it again. And that was enough for tonight. More than enough. The rest could wait until tomorrow, when there was daylight and time, and the whole of what came next, stretching out ahead of them, unhurried, unheld, entirely their own. The morning after Ruth's celebration. Evelyn woke up earlier than usual and lay still for a moment in the particular quiet of a day that had nothing urgent in it for the first time in months. No depth notice to respond to, no counter-move to anticipate, no documents to gather, or letters to write, or careful calculations about what Wesley Cole might do next. Just the ordinary sounds of a Silver Creek morning wind off the hills, a horse somewhere on the street below. The particular creak of her house settling into the cold the way it always did in October. She lay there and let herself feel it. Not triumph. Not even relief exactly. Something quieter than both of those. The specific feeling of a weight that has been so long in place that you forgot it was there until the morning you woke up and it was gone. She got up, made coffee, stood at her kitchen window and looked at the hills going pale gold in the early light, and thought about her father the way she often did in quiet moments. Thomas Whitmore, who had worked this land and held it and given it to her because he believed she was the kind of woman who would hold it after him. She thought about what he would say if he could see the last 3 months. She thought he would probably say very little because he had not been a man who used words when a nod would do. But she thought the nod would have been a good one. She was on her second cup of coffee when someone knocked at the door. She opened it, expecting Ruth, who had a habit of appearing before 8, whenever she felt there was still celebrating left to do. It was Agnes Farrow. Evelyn stared. Agnes Farrow was standing on her porch in a traveling coat, a worn leather bag at her feet, with the look of a woman who had ridden a very long way and was not sure of her welcome, but had come anyway. She was somewhere in her early 60s, small and upright with sharp gray eyes and the particular weathered steadiness of women who had worked hard land alone for a long time. "Miss Whitmore," she said. "I know I should have written first. I couldn't wait for a letter." Evelyn stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. "I just made coffee." Agnes Farrow came in and sat at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the cup Evelyn put in front of her and said, "I got your second letter on Thursday, the one about the arrest." She paused. "I've been on the road since Friday morning." "That's 2 days of traveling." "It is." Agnes looked at her. "I needed to see the person who did this. I needed to sit in the same room with her." Her voice was entirely steady, but her hands tightened on the cup. 9 years ago I lost my land. 80 acres that my husband and I built from nothing. He died the year before I was alone. I didn't know what I was dealing with, and by the time I understood it was fraud, I'd already signed everything, and there was nothing left to fight with. She paused. "I have spent 9 years believing it was my fault, that I was foolish, that a smarter woman would have seen it coming." Evelyn said nothing. She understood exactly what Agnes was carrying because she had carried a version of it herself for 3 months, and hers had only been 3 months. "You found the thread," Agnes said. "You wrote to me. You made me part of something that stopped him." She set the cup down. "I needed to say that to you face to face. I needed to say thank you, not just for my case, for all of them." Evelyn looked at this woman across her kitchen table. Agnes Farrow, who had come 2 days by stage to sit in a stranger's kitchen and say the thing she needed to say. Who had lost 80 acres and 9 years and had still kept enough of herself intact to write 3 careful pages when a letter arrived from Montana asking her to be brave one more time. "You did the hard part too," Evelyn said. "You kept your records. You wrote back. You trusted me when you had no reason to." Agnes almost smiled. "Your letter sounded like someone who wasn't going to lose." "I had moments of doubt," Evelyn said honestly. "So did I," Agnes said. "Every day for 9 years. They sat together in the kitchen while the morning got properly started outside 2 women who had never met and had been fighting the same man from opposite ends of a decade. And they talked the way women talk when they have been through something that most people around them can't fully understand directly without softening it, without performing anything for anyone. Agnes stayed 2 days. She slept in Evelyn's spare room and ate at Evelyn's table. And on the second morning she met Henry Alcott, who had questions about the Wyoming case that only Agnes could answer, and Gerald Holt, who had the particular expression of a man trying to make his own testimony feel like virtue rather than self-preservation, and who flinched slightly when Agnes Farrow looked at him. Agnes looked at him for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "You knew what those documents were." "Yes," Gerald Holt said. "And you signed them anyway." "Yes." Agnes nodded once. "Then do what you're doing now," she said. "And don't stop doing it. That's all." She said it the way a woman says something when she has used up her anger on it years ago, and what's left is just the hard, flat truth of it. Gerald Holt nodded and looked at the floor and did not say anything else. Checker. Pearl Ingram's letter arrived the morning after Agnes left a different letter from the first one, shorter, written in the same slightly shaking hand, but with a different quality to it. The first letter had been the letter of a woman releasing years of held breath. This one was the letter of a woman who had gotten some of it back. "Miss Whitmore, I have heard from the Federal Commissioner's office that he has been arrested. I have sat with that information for 2 days now, and I find I still cannot quite believe it is real. I have asked my neighbor to read the letter twice to confirm I am not misunderstanding it. I am not misunderstanding it. He is arrested. It is real. I wanted you to know that I have put flowers on my husband's grave this morning, which I have not done in a long time, because going there reminded me too much of everything we lost. Today it felt like I could go back. I think you gave me that. With gratitude, Pearl Ingram." Evelyn read that letter standing at her cutting table, and then she set it down and walked to the window and stood there for a minute, looking at Silver Creek going about its morning, and what she felt was something that didn't have a clean name, but was somewhere in the region of the thing her father used to call reckoning. The moment when you understand the actual shape and size of what you've done. She had pulled a thread. The thread had led somewhere she hadn't known to look for. And the places it led had people in them. Agnes Farrow and Pearl Ingram, and Caleb's sister, and her husband, and 6 others. She hadn't met, and might never meet, whose lives had been altered by a man with careful plans, and a pocket full of papers, and who were now standing in the wreckage of what he'd built, and beginning slowly to see their way out of it. She had not saved them. She was clear about that. They had saved themselves, each one in their own way, in their own time. What she had done was find the thing that connected them and make it visible. That was enough. That was, she thought, exactly enough. She picked up Pearl Ingram's letter and added it to the box that had started with wedding papers and a debt notice, and was now full to the edges with the documentation of 9 years and 8 lives and one man's careful ruin, all of it about to become the central evidence of a federal prosecution that Henry said would take most of the following year to complete, and would result, he was reasonably certain, in a sentence that would mean Wesley Cole, Arthur Wells, David Crane, whatever name he'd been born with, which the federal investigator now knew, and which turned out to be something entirely ordinary and Midwestern, and completely at odds with the careful mythology he'd built around himself, would not be operating in any territory for a very long time. Kapang. The town of Silver Creek took approximately 3 weeks to complete its recalibration. It happened the way small-town opinion always happened. Not in a single moment, but in an accumulation of small ones, each slightly warmer than the last. Until one day, Evelyn noticed that the temperature of the street had returned to something close to what it had been before August, and the people who had crossed away from her were crossing back, and the orders were coming in again. More than coming in. They were coming in from new customers, women who had heard the story, who had watched what she did, who had decided that the seamstress on the north edge of town was someone they wanted to give their business to for reasons that had nothing to do with the quality of her stitching. Although the quality of her stitching remained exceptional. Martha Aldridge came in on a Tuesday morning and spent 4 minutes examining a dress form before she said, without looking at Evelyn, "I may have spoken hastily, in the church." "You may have," Evelyn agreed pleasantly. "I'd like to have a winter coat made, if you have the time." "I have the time," Evelyn said. "Let me get my measuring tape." She did not say anything else about it. She took Martha Aldridge's measurements and wrote them in her order book and quoted a fair price, and Martha paid the deposit without argument and left, and that was the end of it. Evelyn did not need an elaborate apology. She did not need the performance of remorse. She needed the winter coat order in her book and the deposit on her counter, and she had both of those things. She told Ruth about it that evening, and Ruth said, "Martha Aldridge, honestly." "She came," Evelyn said. "That's something. It's the minimum something." "Most things start from the minimum," Evelyn said. "That's all it has to be." Ruth looked at her with the particular expression she wore when she was deciding whether to say the thing she was actually thinking. "You've gotten very philosophical lately." "I've had a lot of time to think." "Or," Ruth said, "you've had a lot of time with a certain rancher from the north end of the valley, and thinking isn't the only thing that's been developing." Evelyn picked up her sewing. "Good night, Ruth." "I'm just observing," Ruth said, entirely unrepentant. What was developing Evelyn had been honest with herself about for several weeks. It was not sudden. It had not arrived in a single moment or announced itself with drama. It had come the way winter came to Montana, gradually, then undeniably, in the accumulated weight of small things that were each unremarkable until you stood back and looked at the whole of them together. The way Caleb listened. Not with the performance of listening that some men offered when they wanted you to feel heard, the nodding, the mirroring, the careful echo of your own words back to you. He listened the way a man listened when he was actually interested in what you were saying and had no agenda beyond understanding it. The way he never once in 3 months of working alongside her through the most difficult situation of her adult life told her what to do. He offered information. He offered help. He offered his presence consistently without drama. He did not offer his opinion on her decisions unless she asked for it, and when she did ask, he gave it straight without wrapping it in deference or managing it for her comfort. The way he looked at her, directly, without the careful management of expression that most people used when they wanted something. He just looked at her the way a man looked when he was seeing what was there and found it sufficient. The way he had turned down 15% of a railway transaction because she was trying to stop the man offering it. She had been paying attention to all of this for weeks, filing it away in the same careful internal archive where she kept everything else, and what she had in that archive now was extensive and clear and pointed in one direction. She just wasn't sure exactly what to do about it. Because the last time she had moved toward a man she believed she understood, he had come to her altar with papers in his pocket. And while she knew clearly entirely without doubt that Caleb Mercer was not that man, and bore no resemblance to that man in any meaningful way, the knowledge lived in her head, and the caution lived somewhere older and deeper and harder to reason with. She was thinking about this on a Friday afternoon in late October, when Caleb knocked 3 times at her shop door, the way he always did, and came in with his hat in his hand. "You have that expression," he said. "What expression?" "The one where you're working something out, and you'd rather not be interrupted, but you also know the interruption might actually help." He sat in the chair across from her cutting table, with the ease of a man entirely comfortable in that chair, which he had been sitting in regularly for 2 months now. "What is it?" She looked at him, decided. "I've been thinking about what comes next," she said. "After all of this, the case is in the federal machinery. Now the land is protected, the business is recovering. What I mean is what comes next for me, personally." He was quiet for a moment. "And what have you concluded?" "That I'm not sure," she said, "which is unusual for me." "What's making it uncertain?" She set her sewing down and looked at him directly. "The last time I was certain about a person I was wrong about everything." Caleb nodded slowly. "That's a reasonable thing to carry." "Is it making me unfair?" she asked. To people who aren't Wesley Cole, Howe was quiet for a moment. The real quiet. The kind she'd learned meant he was actually thinking rather than preparing an answer. "I think," he said slowly, "that being careful after being badly hurt is different from being unfair. Unfair would be holding someone responsible for something they didn't do. Careful is just—" He paused. "Careful is just knowing that trust has to be built from something real. That's not a flaw, Evelyn. That's wisdom." She looked at him. "Is it trust you're talking about?" "I think it might be," he said. Quiet, direct, the way he said everything. "Then here's what I know," she said. "I know that you sat on those church steps when everyone else stayed inside. I know you brought work to my door when my order book was bleeding. I know you turned down 15% of a railway transaction. I know you told me about your sister and your brother-in-law without making it about yourself. I know that in 3 months of being in difficult situations with you, I have not once had to wonder what you were really after." She held his gaze. "I know all of that. What I don't know yet is what I'm ready for." Caleb looked at her steadily. "That's honest. I don't have another mode." "No," he said. "You don't." He turned his hat once in his hands. "Evelyn, I'm not going to tell you what you're ready for. I don't know, and it's not mine to decide." He paused. "What I can tell you is that I'm not going anywhere. I don't have a timeline. I don't have a plan I'm working you toward. I have—" He stopped. Started again, and she understood that Caleb Mercer choosing his words carefully was Caleb Mercer being as honest as he knew how to be. "I have a very strong interest in your company," he said. "And I have a significant amount of respect for the person you are. And I am entirely willing to let whatever that means unfold in whatever time it needs." She looked at him for a long moment. "All right," she said. "All right. All right, Caleb." She picked her sewing back up. "Stay for supper. Ruth's been trying to get me to learn her pot roast recipe, and I made an attempt yesterday that turned out better than expected." Something shifted in his face, that settling again, that quiet thing that wasn't quite a smile. "I'll stay," he said. November came in cold and fast, the way Montana. Novembers did, and with it came the first real snow and the particular slowing of a town preparing to get through winter. Orders picked up coats, heavy shirts, wool alterations, the practical wintertime sewing that kept Evelyn's needle moving steadily through the shortening days. She hired Nora Webb on a Wednesday morning. Nora was 23, recently widowed with a 4-year-old daughter, and the specific desperate competence of a young woman who had been managing alone long enough to know exactly what she could do and was simply waiting for someone to give her the chance to do it. She had come to the shop to ask about alterations and had ended up staying 2 hours because she knew how to sew, and had mentioned it almost apologetically, as if skill was something she needed permission to claim. "Can you do heavy stitching?" Evelyn asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Buttonholes. Clean ones." "Sit down," Evelyn said. "Let me see." Nora Webb sat down and did a buttonhole on a piece of scrap canvas, and it was as she'd said, clean. More than clean. It was good. "I'll pay you a fair wage," Evelyn said. "Every Friday on time, no exceptions. You'll have Sundays, and you can bring your daughter on days when you can't find care. She can sit in the back with a piece of cloth and a blunt needle and learn something useful." Nora stared at her. "You're serious?" "I'm always serious about work," Evelyn said. "Can you start Monday?" "I can start right now," Nora said. "Monday," Evelyn said. "Go home and rest. You look like someone who hasn't rested in a while." Nora Webb started Monday. She was quick, clean, reliable, and grateful without being servile, which was the precise combination of qualities that made working with someone a pleasure. Within 2 weeks, she had mastered Evelyn's system for order tracking and had reorganized the supply shelves in a way that was strictly better than what Evelyn had been doing, which Evelyn acknowledged without ego, because she was not in the business of being wrong about things longer than necessary. Within a month, Evelyn had taken on a second woman, Beth Carver, 41, who had been doing piecework from her home for years and had never had a proper workspace or a proper wage. Then a third, a young woman named May, who had come from a difficult home situation and needed both the work and the particular stability of a place where someone expected something of her every day and paid her fairly for delivering it. The shop got louder. The order book got fuller. Evelyn found herself managing something that had stopped being a one-woman operation without her quite noticing the moment it changed. Ruth came by on a Thursday afternoon and stood in the doorway looking at the 3 women bent over their work and said, "Your father would not believe this." "He'd believe it," Evelyn said. "He always said I should have help. He said you were too stubborn to accept any." "I was right about that too," she said. "Things change." It was the first weeks of December when Henry brought her the final documents in the federal case, not the conclusion of the prosecution, which would take most of the following year, but the formal dismissal of every fraudulent claim against her property, signed by the territorial court and the federal commissioner, closing out the legal architecture that Wesley Cole had spent 18 months constructing around her. She signed the acknowledgement with her full name, clear and steady, and handed it back to Henry. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she agreed. "The prosecution will continue," Henry said. "It will be long. There will be hearings. You may be called to testify." "I know," she said. "I'll be there." Henry stood up and extended his hand, the way lawyers did when something was officially concluded, and she shook it, and he said, "Evelyn, in 40 years of practice, I have never built a case from better material. You gave me everything I needed before I knew what I was looking for." She looked at him. "You know what my father used to say?" "What?" "He said the only thing that makes good land is the person who tends it. The land itself is just possibility." She paused. "I think the same thing is true about a good case." Henry smiled the full smile, not the professional one. Thomas Whitmore was a wise man. "He was," she said. "He really was." The wedding was on a Saturday in late April, when Silver Creek had finally decided that spring was not a temporary condition, and the hills had gone the particular green that came after a long Montana winter, and felt like something the earth was showing off. They married in the same church. Ruth had opinions about this. Ruth had several opinions about this delivered at length over 3 separate conversations, each one featuring a different argument for a different location. The meadow on the north edge of Caleb's land, the courthouse in Billings, where nobody knew them. The front parlor of Ruth's own house, which Ruth offered with the air of someone making a significant sacrifice. Evelyn listened to all of it. Then she said, "I'm getting married in the Silver Creek Baptist Church." "Evelyn, that church is where my parents married," she said. "It's where I was baptized. It's where my father's funeral was held. It has 30 years of my family's life in it, and I am not going to let 8 minutes of Wesley Cole's performance take that from me. She looked at Ruth steadily. I refuse to let him have my land. I am not giving him my church. Ruth opened her mouth, closed it, then said, all right, fine. But I'm doing the flowers, and I will not accept any argument about the flowers. The flowers are entirely yours, Evelyn said. Ruth did the flowers. They were extraordinary. The church was full again, the same people mostly who had been there in August, and some new ones. Agnes Farrow came from Wyoming, which had not been planned, but which Evelyn discovered when she saw the gray-eyed woman in the third pew and felt something move through her that was warm and specifically right. Henry and Margaret Alcott. Clara Devlin, who had spent the last 3 months being exactly the kind of friend she'd always been capable of being when she wasn't afraid. Tom Briggs, who had grown up considerably in the last 8 months. Jim Pearson from the general store. Dorothy Haynes, who had not been wrong about what she'd seen in Billings, and had said so loudly and repeatedly until the right people heard her. Nora Webb sat near the back with her daughter on her lap, and Beth Carver beside her and May at the end of the row. And when Evelyn walked past them, they were all three smiling in the particular way of people watching something that matters to them personally. Caleb was at the front. He looked the way she hoped he would look, steady present, wearing his good suit with the same unself-conscious ease with which he wore everything else. Watching her come down the aisle with the direct, clear expression she had come to understand was simply how Caleb Mercer looked at things he found to be exactly what they were. She wore a new dress. Not the ivory cotton with the hand-stitched lace. She had kept that dress folded carefully in a cedar chest, because she had made it with her own hands, and it was good work, and she was not in the habit of discarding good work simply because of the circumstances in which it had been worn. But she had made a new one for this day. Deep blue wool simply cut with small pearl buttons that Nora had insisted on, and which Evelyn had to admit were the right choice. She walked down the aisle of the Silver Creek Baptist Church in the dress she had made herself in the town she had refused to leave, past the people who had watched her be destroyed and had watched her rebuild, and were now watching her choose on her own terms, on her own timeline, the thing she had decided she was ready for. She reached the front. She stood beside Caleb. The pastor opened his Bible. Caleb leaned slightly toward her and said very quietly, so that only she could hear, "You all right?" "Better than all right," she said. "Good," he said. And he smiled, the full one, the real one, the one she had seen exactly twice before, and which did something significant to her composure on both occasions. The pastor began. They said the vows. She meant every word, and she knew he meant every word, and the particular quality of meaning what you say, when you've been through enough to know the difference between words and truth, that quality was in it, in all of it, and the church felt it. Not just the people who loved them. The church itself, the old wooden bones of it, the windows letting in the April light. It felt like a place where something real was happening. When it was done, when the pastor said the words that made it official, and Caleb took her hand in both of his, with a steadiness that she had come to understand was simply his native state, the church made a sound she hadn't expected. Not applause exactly. Not cheering. Something more sustained than that, more specific. The sound of a community, acknowledging that what it had watched over the better part of a year was something worth witnessing. Something worth being present for. The sound of people who had not always done right by this woman, deciding collectively to do right by her now. Agnes Farrow was the first to her feet. Evelyn saw that, and it mattered to her in a way that she knew would matter to her for the rest of her life. After the church, and Ruth's reception, and the cake, and the conversation, and Agnes Farrow telling Henry Alcott what she actually thought about territorial land law in terms that made Henry blink and recalibrate. She and Caleb walked out into the April evening, and the spring air came down off the hills clean and cold and full of the smell of new grass. She had her hand through his arm. He was warm and solid and real in the way of things you have tested and found to be exactly what they claimed. "Tell me something," she said. "Anything." "The first time you came to my shop, with the work order." She looked at him. "Were you nervous?" I was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes." "You didn't seem it." "I was trained early not to seem it," he said. Ranch work. You learn not to show livestock when you're uncertain. He paused. It's possible that skill transfers to other situations more than I intend. She laughed. It came out full and real, the laugh of a woman who has come through something hard enough to make laughter feel like a luxury, and has arrived on the other side to find it available again. You were nervous, she said. Caleb Mercer, who stared down Wesley Cole in a hotel bar and turned down 15% of a railway transaction without blinking, was nervous about bringing a sewing order to a shop. The sewing order was not the primary thing on my mind, he said. No, she said. I know that now. He looked at her. The stars were coming out over Silver Creek early and bright, the way they were in spring, and the town was behind them, and the road ahead led north toward the valley and toward 32 acres of Whitmore land that had a railway easement running across the northeast corner, and a deed that was clean and clear and permanent and entirely hers. Evelyn, he said. Yes. I'm glad you didn't sign. She looked at the road ahead, at the hills going dark against the sky, at the particular shape of the life she had built, which was nothing like what she had imagined. The morning she put on the ivory dress with the hand-stitched lace, and was entirely completely what she would have chosen if she had known to choose it. So am I, she said. Every day, so am I. They walked north together into the spring night, and her father's land waited where it had always been, and the life that was built on what she had refused to surrender was only just beginning. And Evelyn Whitmore, who had stood at an altar while a man tried to take everything from her, who had kept her land and her name and her business and her own unbending sense of who she was, through every move he made to break her, walked toward all of it without looking back. Because a woman who knows her own worth doesn't need to look back at the people who couldn't see it. She only ever needs to look forward toward the life she built herself, toward the love she chose with clear eyes and a full heart. And that is precisely the only direction Evelyn Whitmore